Sick of being socially engineered.
We're gonna stab your wife, your son. We're gonna stab you with a butcher knife, and then the police chief is gonna say, we love our Somalis, we love our Muslims. Oh, they're so good. Oh, they're so sweet.
Okay.
All right, let's get back to some boring subjects.
Understand the risk to our country.
Freedom brings people together. You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com.
Welcome to episode, I have honestly no idea. I think it's 322. Recorded on December 9th, 2018. We're talking about the history of impeachment. My co-host tonight will be the one and only Tad Western. Mittens is also here. We're going to cover the Clinton and we're going to cover what impeachment means, the Clinton impeachment and its parallels to the Trump impeachment, and everything that you need to know. So stay tuned.
Warning, this show is for adults, produced by semi-adults. So the language is sometimes strong and offensive.
I don't know what I said.
Welcome to We Are Libertarians, where our goal is to help you sound smarter while talking to your friends. We examine current events from a libertarian perspective while treating modern politics with all of the irreverence it deserves.
There has been lie after lie.
We toss out the screaming heads, put people before political parties, and give context to the news to make you think. Now, here's our host, a 15-year veteran of politics and media, Chris Spangle.
Welcome to the program again. My name is Chris Spangle, and that right there is the one and only Tad Western. Tad, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
I'm doing swell.
Excellent.
Can't hear anything in my headphones now, though.
What'd you do? Did you turn it?
I don't know. I can't hear myself. Is my mic on?
Yeah, your mic's on.
I can't hear myself in my...
I can't hear myself. I don't know, man.
We'll do it.
You'll-
It'll be all right. It'll be all right.
You'll
It'll be
do
all
it
right.
live. It's fine.
I'm a broadcast professional.
I'm just
I
looking
can
over
I can
here.
get through it.
Looking at things. Looks like it's all okay. Let me try this one. How about
Check.
that?
Check. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can hear.
You just can't
It's
hear-
off in the distance.
You can hear me, just not you?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can barely hear myself, but it's fine.
That's
I
super
don't need
weird.
to hear myself.
All right, well, you're a
As
professional.
long as the people can hear me, that's all that matters.
You sound great over here.
Oh, that's good. That's wonderful. You do as well. You sound pretty good.
Thank you. Yeah, we're talking impeachment tonight. We're going to talk about the Andrew Johnson impeachment. I always want to say Andrew Jackson or Lyndon Johnson impeachment from 1868, and then we're going to talk about we're going to spend most of our time on the Clinton impeachment because there are so
More
many
relevant.
parallels. Yeah. I don't know if you did any studying for this particular episode, but I did, Tad, and I noticed so many parallels between the 90s and now.
Oh, absolutely.
And we're going to break it all down for you.
It wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't, no.
Seems like forever ago, but it really wasn't.
It feels like forever. And we're going to talk about what impeachment means. You're going to hear a lot about that in 2019 now that the Democrats are taking on. And then Tuesday, we're going to talk about Trump specifically. So we're just spending time on history tonight. So like a nice little light Dan Carlin hardcore history episode for you, but without the storytelling and without the talent and
Probably not as good.
and-
And just Tad here to make jokes.
1/4 of the research. But actually, I don't know if over the last 6 months, I would say you have to go to wearelibertarians.com or in the description on your podcatcher and check out the show notes because now
They're
that
good.
the research team, this one's 24 pages. So you can kind of read the outline that I work off of, prepared by many of our researchers on our research team, which you can join at editor@wearelibertarians.com. Shoot me an email, and you kind of see what they put together if you're curious about joining. And there's, I think, 5 or 6 pages worth of sources.
Yeah, at the end, it was pretty... I scrolled through it.
Yeah, all the articles, all the podcasts, all the documentaries, all the videos, everything that we watched in preparation for this episode. So you can check that out. So I definitely want to highlight that because that's one of the unsung features of We Are Libertarians. So
And I guarantee you we won't get to everything in it. So.
No, not
And
e-
it's probably the most important stuff
No,
that we'll glance over.
no doubt. So these are long, but there's these complicated things. You can't get to all of them. So if you want to read a book about a certain specific thing, then I've got books on there. Speaking of books,
Books.
I accidentally bought 2 copies of something, so I want to gift Tad a nice Christmas gift.
Oh, awesome.
Has a slight imperfection, but
Well, hey.
it's full of great information that I think you're going to love. So go ahead and read what...
Oh, great. So you're definitely on a list.
Yeah, so...
and I will be now after the...
tell the
I
listeners,
appreciate it.
what is it?
This is The Technological Slavery, the collected writings of Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber.
That's
And,
right.
I'm kind of... I like this book cover. I really wish they had the... not his mugshot, but the drawing of him with the hood on the back. That would be neat.
Yes, the Unabomber. So I heard Adam Curry on No Agenda talk about it, and I bought it. The cover, that's actually one of the bombs that he made, yeah. And the
Cardboard.
Yeah, the intro is by Ted Kaczynski, and he's basically, I hate the cover, I hate the title, I wish they had done this differently, but...
Do you ever read any of his writings that he currently still does?
Oh, no, I didn't know he still writes about it.
Oh, yeah, he writes a lot.
Did not know
He has some thoughts.
He's
a lot of them are...
He-
I don't know. A lot of his writings are...
He's an interesting guy. The Unabomber, the great. It's called Manhunt. It's on Netflix, and it's about. But I didn't know that he was part of MK Ultra.
Oh yeah.
So he was 16 years old when he went to Harvard. That's how smart this dude was, and he got hooked up into the CIA program where they basically did mind control on him, and then they couldn't figure out why the guy he's the most insane mass murderer in American history. But
you mean he hated the government because maybe they had a history there?
But the book is actually a lot about, hey, you got to be careful with technology because you're going to find people being over socialized when you have these networks coming online, which sounds like
pretty much all of his writings on technology came true.
Yeah. So
and he wasn't a big proponent of it. So
300 years from now, that book he will be hailed as a prophet.
Yeah, I think. I don't think it's going to take 300 years.
So,
especially with mass surveillance and everything else going on.
But I was like, I've got this extra copy. Who would actually enjoy this? Tad Western would.
You know, I actually have. I think that book on a PDF form on my phone, but it's a lot easier to read
One
than.
Yeah, one day that will disappear when the EMP goes off.
Well, no, I have them saved on all on my computer.
When the
currently going through Tragedy and Hope right now.
Really?
That's quite a long one to read.
I have that on Kindle, which I'm sure it'll be removed at some point. That's why I bought the hardcover, because even though it was more expensive, or the paperback, because something like a Ted Kaczynski or a Carol Quigley book, those are the kind of things that I imagine 20 years from now, Kindle will just disappear those.
Oh, yeah.
You may have bought it, but we don't care. We're going to remove it from your
I
device.
just steal all my anything anyway. any intellectual property, I pretty much just take.
Somebody was telling me...
I'm awful Chinese in that in that sense.
Hey,
stop it, fucko.
Mittens, this is not your copy. We have our own here.
That's my gift. Did you tear that up? Did you do that?
No, it came like that, to be honest.
You a bad kitty? Did you get... I hope you got a scratch and dent special.
I didn't know. That's why I got the second copy, and I forgot to return that in time, so I had two. So
I appreciate it.
I bought it twice. They're really gonna come after me.
And did you use a card? I hope you paid cash.
Oh, I paid with a card. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You're definitely probably bugged.
Yeah. Lots of books on my Amazon and my library record are not good. What's probably the worst one that I've ever checked out from the library was the head of ISIS. What was his name? Al-Baghdadi.
Oh, Al-Baghdadi.
And it was his history of Islam. So
that's a good one. That'll put you on a list. Alexa.
I don't have one of those here.
Oh, come on.
Listen, I'm uncomfortable enough having
Order Mein Kampf.
I don't have that one. No. Lots of Hitler books, but not that one.
I see.
So, we got a really good episode for you, really well-researched episode. The thing about doing research for this kind of show is that the research team works hard on it. I work hard on it. I've spent every waking moment for about 7 days researching impeachment, and I always hope that I can rise to the occasion and actually do a good job of explaining this stuff.
You'll do fine. I'll be right here to hold your hand and guide you through it.
Good. Tad...
Now, I am unprepared,
well,
as always. Well, I'm not unprepared. I am...
Ill-prepared?
Yeah, let's say ill-prepared. I have done preparations, but probably nothing that will...
Mostly ages.
Yes.
Preparation H is the.
Oh,
thank you. All right.
I thought you said ages. I was like, what? My headphones, I can't hear.
But this is a fascinating topic and one that we're going to talk a lot about. And but Tad is mostly here when we get to the more conspiratorial aspects of the Clinton era.
Am I gonna be the right wing vast conspiracy man?
I'm just going to need you to make sure that I don't go full globalist during that.
Oh, well, we'll keep you grounded here.
Okay, good. All right. So the definition of impeachment. All right, let's start right at the beginning of what exactly this means. And thanks to Von Sparger and Sam Schultz for their efforts on this research. The definition of impeachment is the first of several steps required to remove a government official from office. So it's where the lower house of a legislature brings charges against a civil officer of government for crimes, and it doesn't even have to be crimes, alleged to have been committed analogous to the bringing of an indictment by a grand jury. So let's say Tad is president, and
what a great world that would be.
Tad is president, and he's done something that falls under the definition of what is an impeachable offense.
I could think of multiple.
I will then, I as a citizen or a House member or even a president, you can have many different people introduce these sort of things. They introduce the articles of impeachment to the House, and then it's a simple 50+1 majority vote for impeachment on the articles of impeachment, and then the Senate can remove them. So we'll not talk about local impeachment, but mainly just presidential impeachment in this. But anybody can be impeached: the president, the vice president, all civil officers. And impeachable actions are treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors, which we'll kind of talk in depth about. But impeachment is not a trial. It's more of a grand jury type situation where people bring counts of impeachment and an article of impeachment, and then they bring those forth and then present evidence, and then the House votes as a grand jury would. Yes, this is an indictment, this is an indictable offense, this is an impeachable offense, and then those are taken to the Senate. It all starts in the House Judiciary Committee. The Judicial Conference starts there. So anybody can bring any member of the House, the Judicial Conference of the United States, which is made up by judges, a special prosecutor, the president, state or territorial legislatures, a grand jury, a petition of citizens. They all can bring about an indictment. You just have to have a member of the House that will actually bring that about. So the Senate then acts as the courtroom, the jury, the judge, and in the case of the presidential impeachment, the Chief Justice actually presides over it. Yeah. And in judicial removals, it's the vice president. Which in the case of Andrew Johnson, the vice president at the time was Aaron Burr. He had 2 weeks before killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel, which was
old dueling Burr.
Which, if you want to know what's confusing about impeachment, is it was not an impeachable offense to kill Aaron Burr, and so the guy who,
as it shouldn't have been,
right, or Alexander Hamilton, right. Alexander Hamilton is best known for being a Broadway show now.
Yeah, they did him a lot of justice.
Right. So
have you seen Hamilton? 'Cause
I have not.
I have not
No.
either.
I'm not.
I'll stay in my lane on that one.
I'm not wealthy enough. So the managers present the case against the accused from the House. So you'll hear, like, Bob Barr, for instance, in the Clinton impeachment, was a manager of this. The accused lawyers act as the defense and present their case in opposition, and at the end of the trial, the Senate votes on the guilt accused, and it's a two-thirds
majority.
Right. So it's very easy to be impeached. It's very hard to actually get removed. Yeah. Right. So in the case of Andrew Johnson, for instance, one vote saved his bacon, and it was never close. It was like 50-50 in some of the counts on impeachment for Clinton. So you don't have to commit a crime. So I think a lot of people think, well, you have to commit a crime, and any crime is impeachable, and that's not true. It's how has it been phrased? Not every crime is impeachable, and not every impeachable offense is a crime. Right.
Correct. Yeah.
So I want to play this video from Cass Sudenstein, who is a very intelligent person, and he outlines exactly what may or may not be an impeachable offense. So this is a Big Think video, Impeachment 101, why, when, how the president can be removed from office.
Impeachment, it turns out, was a very central part of the Constitution of the United States, meaning it's obscure, people don't know about it, but it probably was necessary for the Constitution actually to be ratified by the American people. You can see the impeachment clause, and I'm going to explain its content in a moment, but you can see it as part of the American Revolution itself, in the sense that the revolt against a king who was a leader who had authority over we the people was incomplete if we didn't have a mechanism by which we could get rid of our leaders, including the president, which was a way of ensuring we didn't have anything like a monarchy. Now, the way impeachment worked is that in the early American colonies, before America was America, we started impeaching people who were following orders from the king. And what that meant was that an abuse of authority would be called out by some legislative assembly. And in the initial phase, what would happen would be there'd just be a vote that the person had abused authority. And then if the thing fell to completion, and this goes back to England, there'd be a trial. And in the trial, the person would be convicted of the offense for which impeachment was had. And if convicted, the person would be removed from office. So to bring this back to the American structure as it developed after the Revolution and after the Constitution came into place, and this was thought through with such care in Philadelphia when the Constitution was debated. The idea was that if there is a high crime and misdemeanor, and we can talk a bit about what that means, or if there's treason or bribery, then the House of Representatives, by majority vote, can impeach the president, the vice president, Supreme Court justices, members of the cabinet. And what that means is there's a kind of official judgment that the person has done something very, very bad. And after that, the proceeding moves to the Senate, which is acting like a court and which decides whether to convict, which means to remove the person from office. The House makes the impeachment vote by a majority vote. That doesn't mean anyone has to leave office. It then goes to the Senate, which, if it votes by a 2/3 majority, to convict on the ground on which the, let's say, president was impeached, then the person is, as they say about baseballs that are hit very hard, the president is gone. Yes, so because the word high crimes and misdemeanors seems to mean kind of felonies, high crimes and misdemeanors, the normal current reader would think, oh, is there a crime? If you go back to the 18th century, it's actually a lot more inspiring like that than that, and kind of fitting with a system that's committed to self-government. So if there's a crime, let's call it jaywalking or shoplifting or not paying your income taxes, that's not a high crime or misdemeanor in the constitutional sense. What is meant by high crime and misdemeanor is an abuse of official authority. And shoplifting or income tax evasion, that's a crime. It's not an abuse of official authority. If the President of the United States, let's suppose, decides, I'm going to pardon every police officer who shot an African American, that's not itself likely to be a crime. The president has the pardon power, but that is definitely an impeachable offense. In fact, James Madison spoke of abuse of the pardon power as an impeachable offense. If the President of the United States decides, I'm going to go on vacation in Paris for the next 6 months because it's really beautiful, that's certainly not a crime, but it's an impeachable offense. That's an egregious neglect of the authority of the office. So abuse of the authority of the office, if it's egregious, pardon power example would be one. If the president starts invading civil liberties in a terrible way by
Just a minor,
locking
not a
people
minor.
up for insufficient reason, by going crazy in terms of security measures at airports and borders. And by going crazy, I'm using that as kind of a legal term of art, really exceeding the bounds of the reasonable. That is not a crime, but that is an abuse of authority. And there we're right back in the impeachment clause, which is, I think, first and foremost, a way of preserving our rights and liberties and a way of calling out an authority who has invaded them. Think now about what the American Revolution was fought for.
So, in other words, the word impeachment means literally to basically impede their progress, and it comes from its foundation in English law, where it's developed as a means of targeting people that were too highly placed. So, the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors, it originally was being debated as the phrase is great crimes, malpractice or neglect of duty, corruption, incapacity, negligence, and maladministration. But the founders who were drafting the Constitution didn't want to have something that was... They didn't want to enumerate what the crimes might be. They knew
made it vague as possible.
Exactly. Treason and bribery are very clear, but then they wanted to add another portion where it was... I almost turned into Porky Pig there, but portion. But they wanted to add something in that expressly said that you can remove somebody because, as Ben Franklin said, we don't want to leave the only means of removing an executive to be assassination. That's not an exact quote, but he basically was saying
Yeah.
And so George Mason is actually the one who came up with the term high crimes and misdemeanors. Impeachable offenses started, but Mason didn't think that it covered many of the offenses that one could commit against the Constitution. The phrase is often interpreted to include cases of maladministrations. So there has been no definition inside the Supreme Court or what's called judicial review of the impeachment clause. It's still very broad. It's not been narrowed by the Supreme Court. One of the few things that the Supreme Court has done is actually said that the Senate is the only place that someone can be removed. But the term is very broad as to what you can do. You can go back and when you really look at the history and when you really understand what is an impeachable an offense and what was meant by high crimes, meaning somebody who's in a high position is the only one who could actually take care of this. When you look at it, Andrew Johnson, as we'll discuss, his impeachment was BS. It was political. Bill Clinton, BS. It was political. I think a lot of what's being thrown up against Trump is political, but not Richard Nixon. Ironically, the one person we're not going to really cover in this, because he was not impeached. We'll talk about Watergate some other time. He was never actually impeached.
Well, yeah, he resigned.
The day that they basically voted in the Judicial Committee to impeach him, and it was clear that he was going to be impeached, he resigned later that day. Because he didn't want to be impeached, it was clear that he would be removed from office. It was not...
And it's really quite a good process, too, if you think about it. I mean, it's not... Anything can be brought as an impeachable offense, but then to be convicted 2/3 is... I mean, that's... If you're going to be convicted, I mean, that's...
It's clear.
It's rather clear.
Right. And that's the whole point of it, is that what was committed was an egregious offense. And as so much of law and the Constitution, a lot of the court system, it is about setting a precedent for future generations. This is what we deem to be constitutional or not, or to deem to be appropriate behavior or not. Richard Nixon obstructed justice. He bribed and paid off informants and witnesses. He witness tampered. He lied to the American people. He lied under oath. There's many, many different ways that he violated the law and abused his authority as the President of the United States. So it was very clear to the majority of America that this guy needed to be stopped. And so the Congress of that time basically said, hey, all future executives, these things will get you impeached. This is unacceptable behavior. Now, when you look at Clinton, he was actually brought up on charges of impeachment, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, but his crimes were considered to be
civil case. I mean, it was
right,
literally a lawsuit that they.
he committed perjury by lying about an active sexual affair, And many people just didn't think that rose. That was not right. It wasn't good, but it didn't have anything to do with his office.
No.
And so, therefore, he shouldn't be removed from office. But we'll cover more of Clinton. So it's been tried, I think it's 19 times, and it started with, the first one was John Pickering. You go back in history, John Pickering was a Federalist judge. Obviously, the Federalists were in charge under Washington and Adams. Adams started stacking the court with federal judges and really ticked off all of the Jeffersonian Republicans at that time, and they wanted to make a statement, essentially. And so they found one federal judge, his name is John Pickering, who was sort of going through dementia and an alcoholic, and it was very...
Sounds fun.
Yeah, right. AKA my future. And they wanted to have the clear separation of powers enforced and make a statement to the Federalists, hey, mind yourself. And
check yourself.
Exactly right. And in the Samuel Chase in 1805, in that particular impeachment of that Supreme Court justice, it did change a lot of his behavior. He was reined in as a justice, and it really had like a chilling effect on future justices and how they were less partisan after those two impeachments. And that was the point of the impeachments. Now, it's always wrapped in partisanship, but those were all ultimately the lessons that they were trying to push through. So it's the actual constitutional amendment, or not amendment, but actually part of the Constitution, Article 2, Section 4, Constitution of the United States. The President, the Vice President, and all civil officers of the U.S. shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So that is what the Constitution says about that. Tad?
That's me.
If you were to be impeached for something, what would you think it would be?
Oh, Jesus Christ, I don't know. Well, I don't know, because I think once you get to the office, I don't think I would continue my shenanigans that I do on a daily basis now.
You don't?
No.
So knowing that I think I would bet, I don't know, you're surprisingly upstanding, I think.
I'm an outstanding member of society.
I don't really feel like I know you all that well, but I would say dueling.
Oh, yeah, I would definitely. But it's not impeachable.
I know, yeah.
It would be fun, though.
So this
Bring back the dueling days.
Impeachment was actually a big part of why it was ratified, because they were debating back and forth that, well, you can't put in the pardon clause, which is not it's not Santa's brother. Pardon clause is a different guy. But
I thought they were cousins.
Basically how the executive branch gets to pardon people.
For federal crimes.
Yes. The explicit fear, see if this sounds familiar, the explicit fear from one of the founders, he basically said, like, I'm worried about having the pardoning powers under the executive branch, because what if the president does something wrong, and then as he's being investigated just starts pardoning or hinting that he'll pardon anybody who might squeal on him.
Yeah.
So they wanted to enable the impeachment, and so that's why when you hear we're heading towards a constitutional crisis, if Trump had never done anything wrong, but then he goes and pardons Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort and anybody who might speak out against him, that could be something that the House could impeach him on, because he's using his powers as president to get people out of jail, something that only he can do. And that's kind of one of the biggest fears, and that was one of the fears of the founding generation that's kind of coming true now. And so the impeachment power was put in there. If you do these behaviors, you could be impeached. Now, would Trump actually be impeached or removed from that? Who knows? It depends on what the makeup of any Congress is.
Yeah, the Senate right now probably not. It depends on what charges were brought as well. I mean, who knows? We don't know. I'm sure we'll find out soon.
I think, January. The reason we're doing this in December is because January we're going to get, it's giddy up time.
Yeah, I think Mueller's going to have his report, which is mainly a suggestion, I guess, about what he's found on Russia collusion, I guess, is what. But if you read the Comey documents that just came out, the Manafort documents, the memos that he wrote, I believe there's 3 or 4 investigations going on, which they're all blacked out.
Really?
Yeah, 3 on top of the Russia investigation into the election.
Well, it looks like Michael Cohen and paying off of.
From what I've been reading, is a few of them could be Southern District of New York cases that would be state cases, more than likely. And then I think there's probably an investigation into the alleged payments of Stormy Daniels as a campaign contribution. So
Right.
I assume this is all me guessing, just knowing the history of the past 2 years or since 2016. But
Right.
who knows? I mean, right now it's kind of early to know. And then there's also the obstruction of justice, which there's probably an investigation going on with that.
Like why he fired Comey? Is he tampering with anyone?
Yeah, and then the timeline around all that's. I think Pence has some stuff to do with. I don't know. It's kind of a. Who knows? I don't. A lot of redacted black bars in those memos.
Yeah.
And then on top of all that.
So is there actually going to be a report? Because I heard he was just going to leak out documents, and we're really only going to get the story through these court filings. He's not actually going to be able to put
I
out
don't
a
believe
report.
the report will be made public. I think he has to make a report for.
He makes
for
it.
con-
Yeah,
for-
he makes it to Rosenstein.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then more than likely, it won't be released to the public.
Right.
I'm sure the Congress will get it, but
I'm sure a lot of it will be leaked.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, because I don't believe. Well, the timeline, I don't know. Maybe later on,
Right.
But hell, Trump could declassify it or whatever if he wanted to. I mean, what? Who knows? I would like to know. You know,
Right.
I'm sure all of America would. But.
Well, I think when you look at it, when you look at these definitions and this understanding, if he sent an email, and Alan Dershowitz even says that this isn't impeachable, but if you see he sent an email to Vladimir and said, "Hey, Vladimir, I want you to directly attack this campaign and get me information so I can get elected," Alan Dershowitz says that's not impeachable because that's the criminalizing of political behavior.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole issue behind it. Collusion isn't even a crime, or no one even knows. It's so broad, nobody even knows
Right.
what it.
There's no
And actually, Gowdy. I just read the transcript of there was 240 pages of it. I don't know if you looked at that.
of the Comey testimony.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what Gowdy even tried to get Comey to. What is collusion? What?
Right.
Because it means nothing to us, and I mean that's the House
Judiciary Committee.
Yeah,
Yeah, there
I can't
is
talk.
no legal definition of collusion, and so, Clinton was brought up on.
And then trying to influence an election, if you're a candidate, I mean that's pretty much your job. You're
Right.
trying to win, and who knows?
Impeachable offenses can happen before you're president. I think when you look at, for instance, Manafort and his 2006 shenanigans, that's not impeachable on Donald Trump and his ability to perform duties within the office.
And the only thing they're getting them on is process crimes, pretty much.
That's
lying. Right. And then if you look at it, these are supposed to be your building the case against Donald Trump,
Right.
and everyone has lied. Literally everyone has been convicted of lying.
All of the witnesses that might testify on behalf of Mueller's case are all convicted perjurers at this point. So there's not many people. They're all being coerced into giving testimony, which doesn't actually bode well for persuading a grand jury that the president committed actual crimes. I think the one that is probably, so when you look at like an FEC violation, and
I think that's the one that.
See, I don't think that is a high enough crime.
No,
so,
not to be impeached. I think
Right.
that's the only thing that they could bring out that's provable that you could bitch about. But I don't.
Trump had Cohn pay Stormy Daniels to influence the election and didn't report it to the FEC. That not reporting things correctly to the FEC, that happens with every presidential campaign. There's no way they're going to criminalize that. The one that I think that could stick, and I think the one that they're trying to make work, but they can't really get to it. That's why Trump has never released his tax returns, is a violation of the emoluments clause. And that is essentially if Donald Trump is doing things with, for instance, Saudi Arabia or Russia, and he is acting in a certain way as president to avoid having his business interests hurt in Russia, for instance, then that could be a violation. That could be an impeachable offense, or the equivalent of insider trading, which is he, as president, and Ivanka Trump or Jared have access to information that they're passing along to Don and Eric Trump, who are running the Trump enterprises, and then they're profiting as a corporation. That could be an impeachable offense, and it would be Trump's own fault because he never actually divested from Trump Industries. He still has a financial interest in his own company, and had he cut ties, it would be a non-story. But I really think that is the one that is egregious, or if he were committing money, he had laundered money for the Russians or the Saudi Arabians, that could be impeachable. But it really goes to the heart of corruption. Is this person so morally and in duty corrupt that they can't execute the jobs of the presidency? Then they can be impeached. If they're physically impaired, there's some arguments that Woodrow Wilson, he should have been impeached because he had a stroke and was fairly incapacitated. Even to Calvin Coolidge, his son died while he was in office, and his demeanor supposedly greatly changed right after his son died. Is he incapacitated in that moment to do the duties of the presidency in a way that is efficient? I have mused out loud about the 25th Amendment, and if Donald Trump is mentally fit enough to be president, I think that he is. I think that in terms of his issues with his bad business dealings, with a lot of stuff, you have to look at it. You have to look at a lot of the things that happened with Bill Clinton, Andrew Johnson, Donald Trump, all these people who, and even Richard Nixon to some extent, but Donald Trump was a known quantity when the voters voted for the guy.
Yeah.
And so
a lot of people voted for him because of
right. So Donald Trump, we all knew that he was a shady businessman. We all knew that Donald Trump was a little out there. We all knew that Donald Trump did these certain things. So it's not for the Congress to override the will of the voters just because he's politically unpopular. Political popularity really doesn't have much to do with it. It's, can the guy serve as his duty? And if you want to get rid of him, then you can do so in 2 years. And it's not for the Congress to, and that's why some in the founding generation didn't want the impeachment clause in there at all, because they said, listen, the voters get to decide who's president, and if they select a wildly corrupt politician like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, then that's what they want. And they have to live with the consequences. It's not for us to fix that.
And honestly, the checks and balance system works pretty well. I mean, as we see with just other than executive orders, which can be undone, like what Trump did his first 30 days in office, undoing pretty much everything Obama did, just reversed it. But anything that you have, I mean, the laws are made in the Senate or whatever, and that stuff's pretty much ingrained. I mean, well, you see with healthcare, I mean, he can't just snap his fingers and get healthcare done.
People wanted the opposite of Barack Obama. They're getting it.
Yeah, and 4 years really isn't that long of a time frame if you think about it in reality.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it seems we're going through it. It seems every day it's harped on.
It feels so significant.
Any day now, Trump will be impeached. But hell, by the time the way the government works, it's so damn slow.
Right.
I mean, 4 years you can. I mean, if there is something that comes on or that goes on, and the public surely would.
Well, I think about Richard Nixon. I think people lost faith in government, but at the end of the day, the republic didn't end because a crook was president for 5-6 years.
No.
The republic is much more robust than I think a lot of people give it credit for. We're going to survive Donald Trump, and yeah, he's changed a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that things can't go back or things can't change in a lot of ways.
And it does set a precedent too for future presidents, and Well, hell, I
Yeah.
don't know who would want to run for president, especially after.
I don't know, man. So let's talk about Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was born in 1809 in North Carolina, and he actually had no schooling. I was amazed to hear that Andrew Johnson didn't know how to read or write until his 20s. He was apprenticed to a tailor at age 10, and he was on a path to just be a tailor for the rest of his life. And then he became self-educated in his early 20s. And because I think partially because he couldn't read or write, he was at an absolutely natural talent at debating and speaking, and he worked his way up through the political landscape of Tennessee. He was an alderman, a mayor, a state legislator, and then the House of Representatives, and he never lost an election. He was just an absolute natural of his time.
Neither is Donald Trump.
But here's the thing. You're going to see parallels between Johnson, Clinton, and Trump. And one of them is they are not elites. They are not aristocrats. They're not landed gentry. There's a big difference between George H.W. Bush and Bill and Donald, for instance. And so Andrew Johnson was really known as a very talented politician who was someone who stuck up for the lower classes, specifically in this time frame, the lower class Southern whites, who really felt the pressure from the aristocratic whites and then also the growing rights of black Americans, especially during Reconstruction. And so he was somebody that was speaking for that particular identity group in his time frame. And he was always pissing off the wealthy landowners that funded his politics. He would eventually, they tried to gerrymander him out of office. They actually did succeed in that. And he would be elected governor twice and ended up in the U.S. Senate right before the Civil War. And so here's the weird thing about Johnson, is Johnson was from Tennessee. It's the last Southern state, the last of the 11 Confederate states, but he was loyal to the Union.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the only Southern senator that didn't resign his post to go join the Confederacy. And so Lincoln recognized his loyalty and awarded him actually the position of military governor of Tennessee. And he later in Abraham Lincoln's second run, he actually added him to the ticket. And he became vice president on March 4th, 1865. And 42 days later, Andrew Johnson would be president.
Okay, president.
Right.
How'd that happen?
Well, the first assassinated president, which is another way to remove a president from office,
Faster way.
which we don't condone, and is why the impeachment clause was put in place, because people like Monroe and Franklin didn't want assassinations to take place. Because one person, for instance, in America shouldn't have the ability to overrule the wish and desire of millions politically. So a lot of people were optimistic, although he was a little bit of a wild man. He was a little uncontrollable. He got really drunk at the inauguration, for instance.
Wow, you just got inaugurated. Come on.
Right. He was
It's a party.
He was during this great speech, Lincoln's, I think that was his House Divided Will Not Stand speech. It was the second inaugural address. He's just in the back ranting and raving. Like Rudy Giuliani's son, if you remember that. Remember that Saturday Night Live?
Yes.
Yeah, Chris Farley's jumping over Gavin Nealon. I love it. But here you have a Southern Union-supporting Democrat as the turned Republican as the vice president. And so everybody's like, well, we're really bummed about Lincoln, but this is going to be a really tough part. The war's over. Reconstruction is beginning. We've got a Republican who was, you have to remember, the Republicans were a brand new party.
Mm-hmm.
They were built on the back of being anti-slavery. They were seen as the more moral party. They were replacing the Whigs. And they were really, as any conquering power does, they were looking for retribution against the South. And they were passing a lot of things in Reconstruction that were very aggressive towards the Southern states, really wanting the Southern states to pay for the war. And they were really counting on the Republican president to help in those efforts. And the radical Republicans ended up being a common sparring partner of Andrew Johnson because he was more lenient.
More sympathetic.
He was more sympathetic to the South. And he was also a racist. He was also somebody that didn't feel that blacks deserved an equal place at the table with the white man, especially the lower classes of white society that he really identified with, that he grew up in. And many of the different things that Congress passed, he would try to obstruct on a consistent basis. And so Reconstruction was really not rolled out in a way that was efficient. He's considered to be one of the worst presidents because of this, because he was continually trying to obstruct and screw up efforts. He also used his position to grant a lot of those slave-owning patricians who had instigated, who had profited off of slavery. These were the people that were vanquished in war. They were
If
defeated.
you can't profit off slavery, you're a bad businessman.
Well, that's the opinion of Tad Western, not that of Weird Libertarians or Chris Spangle himself. And so, so he used his position to restore their power in the South, which just made Reconstruction even harder. So Congress and the president, they would pass something, he would ignore it. And they got pissed. So they, in return, passed the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, and that was meant to help control his power. And then to further control his power, they wanted to pass something called the Tenure of Office Act. And basically, this was, you know how the Senate has to confirm an appointee?
Any appointment.
Right.
Any appointment.
Anybody who wanted to leave had to be confirmed by the Senate too. So if let's say he wanted to fire, who did Trump just let go?
Chief of Staff.
John Kelly wouldn't count because he's not part of the Senate. But Nikki Haley, for instance,
Okay. Yeah.
Haley is, or Zinke maybe on the way, the Agriculture Secretary. He's let these people go. They've either left or he's fired Jeff Sessions. That's a great example.
Tillerson, maybe?
Tillerson. And so Tillerson just is out of a job. Well, under the Office of Tenure Act, the Senate would have to approve the dismissal of this particular person. And in the actual Tenure of Office Act, they wrote in that not following this act would be a high crime and misdemeanor.
Because they knew he wasn't going to.
They knew he wasn't going to do it. Right.
Yeah.
Because they
Gotcha, bitch.
The thing about Johnson, he was very stubborn. He was known to lash out at any critic in a harsh way.
On Twitter?
On Twitter, he was very he was just a pain in the butt, So he was very obstinate. And so he was annoyed by this, and so he decided to test it. And and in shout out to Andrew Bowman for this prep, but he also said 1987 here. He meant 1897.
He was president a while.
Yeah, that's
a long time.
And by mid-1987, nope, that's not right.
1897?
No.
I still want to be right.
1867.
Oh. Typo.
1867. No, it happens, man. So Johnson fired Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, and he replaced him with Major General Lorenzo Thomas.
Don't you like how it was the Secretary of War?
Yeah. Instead of what is it now?
Secretary of Defense now.
Right. Yeah, it's some Orwellian shit. So Johnson wanted to replace him with Ulysses S. Grant. The Senate opposed Johnson's actions and reinstated Stanton. Johnson continued to be defiant and fired Stanton again, and then named Lorenzo Thomas as interim secretary. Stanton had Thomas arrested for illegally seizing his office. Stanton was again reinstated by the Senate, and the articles of impeachment were pursued. Johnson fired Stanton 3 times, and the Senate reinstated him 3 times in a political game of musical chairs. Lorenzo Thomas actually walked into Stanton's office one day. Stanton was in his office. He was surrounded by aides, and Lorenzo said, "Hey, Edwin, I need to talk to you." And he goes, "No, anything you might have to say, you can say in front of these guys." "No, I really need to talk to you in private." No, it's okay. You can say this in front of. He's like, "I'm here to take your office." and Edwin Stanton said, "No, you're not." And then Lorenzo said, "I must insist. I'm here to become the Secretary of War." And Stanton said, "No, you're not." And so along they went. So then in February 24th, 1868, the House passed a resolution of impeachment by a vote of 126 to 47. In total, 11 articles of impeachment were brought against President Johnson. Many of the charges were centered around the president's violations of the Tenure of Office Act. But Article 10, you're not going to believe this, Tad, charged Johnson with making speeches with a loud voice, certain intemperate, inflammatory, and scandalous harangues.
Harangues, that's a good word.
It is.
That should be used more often.
So Article 10 of the Trump impeachment could be, he said mean things about Rosie O'Donnell on Twitter. But that's how
only Rosie O'Donnell.
Only Rosie. That's how loose this is. It's meant to be political. It's not meant for. They didn't want somebody who had bad behavior to be impeached only for crimes. They wanted you to remove the person before the crimes could be committed because the crimes would be so big that it would irreparably harm the office of the presidency or the United States citizenry. And so that's why they made it non-criminal. It can be for scandalous, inflammatory statements. You can impeach them. But the problem is you have the problem is that if the crimes aren't big enough, then people go, oh, you're just partisan hacks, which we'll see in the Clinton impeachment. Like, you're just unfairly being mean to this person. Stop abusing your power as Congress to impeach this person.
Mm-hmm. Which the check on that would be getting voted out by your constituents.
It's exactly right, yeah. So the impeachment trial just consumed everything. And when you look back at the papers, as I was watching a talk from William H. Rehnquist, who wrote a book called The Grand Inquisitions on the Chase and Johnson impeachments, he said nothing got done for these several months. The 14 months.
It's a good way to freeze tie
honestly,
the president's hands.
Exactly. The main argument for the defense was that, led by former Attorney General Henry Stanbury, said Johnson couldn't be impeached for just simply not understanding the law. They also claimed that he was testing the constitutionality of the act before the Supreme Court, which seems to be kind of, opposite ends. Like, he didn't understand what he was doing, but he was also trying to test the law because he understood it fully.
It's kind of just a half-court shot there.
Right, exactly.
Hey, if it goes in, it goes in.
Right. So the Senate printed 1,000 tickets for each day. Eventually, the Senate voted on only 3 of the 11 articles. And on May 16th, 1868, just 11 weeks after the trial began, a vote was taken on the first article of impeachment, but fell 1 vote short of the 2/3 majority needed to convict.
That was John McCain. He gave it a thumbs down.
I think his name was Ross, and he was a Republican. And 7 Republicans defied the party to save the president. And this guy Ross, he was just petrified. He was terrified. I think his actual account is free. If you look up impeachment and Andrew Johnson on Kindle, I think his actual account is free. And there is a great podcast in the show notes called My History Can Beat Up Your Politics. And it's always great on these kind of things. And in one of his shows about this, he outlines the actual experience. And he talks about how this particular Republican senator, there were two reasons that these Republicans ended up acquitting the guy. First was...
What state was he from?
Andrew Johnson was from Tennessee.
Tennessee, but
yes.
Ross
was...
Where was Ross from? I'm just curious. I don't remember reading that.
You may Google it, but look up Andrew Johnson impeachment Ross, and you'll find it. But there's 2 ways to look at this. First, they were 7 months away from Ulysses S. Grant being elected president. Everybody knew they were going to have an incoming Republican president. They were going to get rid of Johnson. They were going to have this war hero become their presidential nominee, and they were going to win. And the Democratic Party had largely been beat back, and the Republicans had very good majorities on things. And so why risk the chance of having another Republican president for impeachment? Because you know there's going to be fallout no matter what you do here. So a lot of those Republicans, especially who were, in jeopardy, decided to vote for Andrew Johnson. The other reason that these guys voted for him was graft. So you had a patronage system, and you'll see this again in Clinton. This is the reason that the state troopers got mad at Bill Clinton. They didn't get him jobs. the Republican Senator Ross, who actually saved Johnson's bacon, later wrote a note to Johnson, "Hey, I need you to appoint this person, and it's because of the vote." Like, he basically said, "I promised this person a job in exchange for the vote, so make sure this guy gets a job, or else we'll all be up S Creek." So that was the whole system. It's like, you go to the conventions back then, and it was just people promising each other jobs.
Oh yeah.
So, and it's still
is.
Yeah, exactly right.
Probably not as bold stated, but
well, why do you think the Heritage Foundation or the Brookings Institution or any of these think tanks in Washington exist? The entire reason that Podesta founded the Citizens Progress, what is it? What is that? What is the one he runs? The think tank.
The think tank or the Podesta group?
Well, there's a Podesta-run think tank, or he at least started it. And it's Americans for Citizens or something or whatever.
Oh, Americans for
what I'm talking.
Is it prosperity? No,
progress, something.
I can't.
Yeah, but anyways, the whole reason that was founded was that when Bush won and all of those people weren't going to have jobs in the Clinton White House, they go work for the think tank.
Yep.
And then these people work for the think tanks, and then when the Republican administration comes in or the Democratic administration comes in, then they empty out. Yep. All of these think tanks on the right or the left empty out when their administration is in place. And so that's the swamp. If you don't have a job, then you'll find one at the Americans for Center Progress or whatever.
Hope if you're good, you'll find a job.
Maybe.
Based on your qualifications.
Maybe.
We only hire the best.
Loyalty.
Here at the Tad Western Research Institution.
Some, at least in words, said, I would like to see the Tad tank.
Tad tank or Tad tank?
Tad tank? Yeah, let's start a think tank, Tad. What if you were starting a think tank?
That'd
what
be
would
the
it
triple
around?
T. That's good alliteration there. The Tad tank. What would we focus on?
Yeah.
Laundering money, more than likely. That's the only reason to start a think tank, isn't it?
Listen, the Clintons have done great business on that, as we'll see later.
We'll sell access. To what and whom? Yet to be defined.
So, Republican Senator James Grimes of Iowa stated, "I cannot agree to destroy the harmonious working of the Constitution for the sake of getting rid of an unacceptable president." Even just kind of incompetence. I think we can all agree that Donald Trump is not fairly competent at the job. I think he's pretty incompetent at the administration of the job and also the political side of the job and
he's
the vision side.
Firing people.
He's good at firing people, but he's like the World War I trench warfare of political people. Like, he just grinds. He's like a meat grinder of talent. It's
fun to watch. Remember the Mooch?
Yes.
His 9 days.
9 days. I
like the Mooch.
I think Donald Trump is an incompetent president. I don't think he should be impeached just because he's bad at the job. But mostly I think the comedy of having him as president is great.
It's quite the what's the word? Shit. I don't know. It's quite it's neat to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's quite what the hell's the word I'm looking for? I need a beer. I'm falling asleep.
A lot of people are.
I know. I can't. It's quite the experiment, I guess.
Yes, exactly right. So yes, just being a bad president or having bad policies is not enough to impeach someone, and that's what people under Andrew Johnson, even not choosing to execute the laws, that's not impeachable. I mean, you have these questions of what if the president just decides not to execute certain things. Well, that happens all the time. For instance, Obama said, "I'm not going to enforce pot laws," or "I'm not going to enforce certain laws. I'm not going to do these things." Donald Trump does the same. Haldeman, Nixon would call up Haldeman, his chief of staff, and say, "I want you to do this." And Haldeman would say, "Yes, sir," and then just not do it. And then if Nixon called back and said, "Why didn't this thing get done?" then he would actually do it because he knew he was serious.
Yeah.
But Nixon was famous just for calling people up and saying, "Do this thing," and they go, "Yes, sir." There's even one where Nixon calls, I think it's Butterfield, and says the Washington Post is not allowed in the White House anymore. And
that was when Jim Acosta worked for him.
Right. And he goes, "Absolutely." And he goes, "No, I mean it. They're not allowed in here. do this or you're fired. You understand me? Oh, Nixon. So it took 14 months for from the time the Tenure of Office Act was passed to the acquittal of Johnson. The Nixon Watergate affair and the Whitewater Clinton affair both took 5 years each. So the reality of Trump, for instance, getting impeached, do you think Trump has 5 years from the start of the Mueller investigation? He's going to deal with this into his second term. Is he going to get reelected? Who knows?
I don't know. I would, honestly, I think he will. If he runs, there's serious people think that he might just not even run for the second term.
There's a lot of people who just think that he will go away because he doesn't like doing this. He's too bored doing the same thing every day.
Which I could see it. I think if he gets accomplished what he wants,
right,
what he thinks is what he wants or what he thinks is enough, then I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think if he runs, he will win again. I don't see I don't know.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of baggage he has to run on, making himself look like the victim, Especially if they don't find anything substantial. I mean, he will.
Well, as we'll see in the next segment here about Clinton, I mean, it really helped his
Oh, absolutely. His approval went through I think it was the highest ever when he left office, wasn't it?
Yep. 65%. 65, 67%.
I think it was 67.
It was hitting
close to 70.
It was hitting 70% and during the actual impeachment. So Johnson finishes out his term on March 4th, 1869. He was acquitted on May 26th, 1868. So a little under a year later, he's out. But he would return to Washington as a senator in 1875, and he'd served just 3 months before he died. So not bad luck, Johnson.
Bad luck, Johnson.
So here is an outsider who is a little bit of a wild card, who is a little bit, maybe not the best character. He's not the George Bush humble guy who not Lincoln, that's for sure. Who gets
That's a big one
impeached.
to live up to.
Yeah, he just wasn't liked, so he got impeached. Another Washington outsider was impeached as well, and his name was Bill Clinton. And Clinton... Slick Willie. Here's the thing you have to understand about Clinton. Hillary Clinton has destroyed Bill Clinton's reputation. I have always kind of thought that, but man, you watch some documentaries and read some stuff for this. Like, Clinton was so freaking gifted as a politician. He was elected governor at like 32 in Arkansas. He basically ran Arkansas's machine. It was all democratically run. I mean, he ran it with an iron fist, by 35. Like,
he was a natural.
He was. He went to Oxford and then came back, became attorney general in Arkansas. Well, let me give you an example. So, because Donald Trump is often seen as an outsider, and it's hard to think of Bill Clinton any way other than kind of how we think of him now, which is just sort of this sad sexual predator who's partisan and married to Hillary Clinton, and she's terrible. And, like, you don't realize the guy was probably the most gifted lawyer of his generation.
Their history's fascinating.
Yeah, he was an up-and-comer. He was the first Democratic president elected since Carter, and Carter wasn't that awe-inspiring. So since really JFK and LBJ, like, Clinton was seen as, here's this young, dynamic Democratic president. He met JFK. He looks like JFK. He's got that sexual swagger. He's got this, I guess, beautiful family. It was often labeled Camelot 2. I mean, he was the loins of the New York Times and the Washington establishment on the left side in Hollywood, they were just in love with Bill Clinton. They were just so excited when he became president because he was also a masterful politician. This guy, it's hard to understand a president who can just come up with a policy at the tip of his fingertips. When Bill Clinton saw a problem, he saw a policy issue. And we're so partisan now that we don't even think of the presidency in terms of government policy. It's more drama. But
it's all reality TV now.
Right. But Bill Clinton, I'm not saying he was a good president, but I'm saying he was an effective president who managed the bureaucracy really well.
He was a good politician.
Yes, and he was really well
Great
liked.
politician.
Yes, and like H.W. Bush, he was president when I was younger and when I was falling in love with politics. I remember being in high school, I think, and my family went in to watch a movie, and I stayed in the car to listen to the Senate judge his impeachment because I was so into it. That was February of 1999. And so I look at the Clinton era, and I'm like, I'm nostalgic for that politics because that's what it was like when I was a kid. But Clinton was, he was a big government politician for sure, but he was a gifted one nonetheless. And that's why he scared the crap out of Republicans because the Democrats had already had the Congress for 40 years at that point.
Yeah.
And then you've got Congress that is fully run by Democrats, and then you've got a gifted Democratic politician who's very popular. Well, we can't deal with this, so we need to really ramp up the more seedy parts of his character.
And in comes Newt.
Good old Newt in '94. But this is from Sidney Blumenthal, who is a garbage person, but also
Clinton confidant.
He wrote the Clinton Wars. He was an insider in the Clinton world. And listen to what he said when Clinton entered Washington. This is from a great documentary called The Hunting of the President. It is from the Clinton side. Like, if you want the two counterbalances, there's the Clinton Chronicles on YouTube, and that was from the Arkansas vast right-wing conspiracy. And then there's The Hunting of the President, which was from the Clinton people.
If you want a neutral one, there's the... did you watch the A&E one?
The Clinton Affair?
The Clinton Affair?
Yes, I've got a couple clips from it, but that was the most neutral...
I thought that was a good...
It was really down the middle. It was really, really good. It's on Hulu right now. The Clinton Affair is great, and I recommend that to everybody. But this is from The Hunting of the President. So here is how Sidney Blumenthal describes the beginning of the Clinton presidency.
There was a sense among a certain social set in Washington that Clinton was not their kind of person. He gave a little talk at a party that was given to welcome him to town when he was president-elect. And he noted that those who came to Washington weren't there to serve themselves, and shouldn't be, but to serve the people who sent them. Now, some of those at that party thought that he was criticizing them, and they didn't understand that he wasn't talking about them or parties. He was talking about the White House and the Congress. He was making a political statement, but this was a threat to the status system in Washington. And those who chose to accept it as such chose to reject Clinton as an interloper, an outsider, and to stigmatize him as white trash. And here he is, somebody who's deeply conciliatory and moderate in his nature, and yet arouses intense opposition. What's the source of the paradox? It has to do with the entrenched power that he's confronting and trying to change.
Doesn't that sound a lot like Trump coming in?
The swamp.
Yeah, the swamp is going to oppose him. The deep state is going to oppose this outsider president who's kind of moderate and a deal maker by nature. You could look at Andrew Johnson in the same way. Andrew Johnson, here's a white trash president who's, kind of can see all sides because he's been a part of all sides, but he's not part of the establishment. He's got to be taken on. So, and I think there's a lot to be said for somebody who is an outsider president coming in and establishing existing authority. Let's start ramping up the different conspiracies and see if we can't get this person out because they are a threat to the
you don't want to make
state.
you don't want to make enemies in D.C. I
Yes.
mean, especially coming in on your first day.
Yeah, right. So I thought that is an interesting parallel between these three presidents that we're talking about. Again, Nixon was the deep state. Like, he's a totally different situation. And we're not talking about him because A, time, and B, he wasn't actually impeached.
And it's not as relevant as today's Clinton. The crossover between the Clinton investigation and then the Trump investigation right now is just, if you look at it, they're almost symbiotic.
It is really amazing. When you watch the Clinton affair, you're watching this going, oh, this is the same thing as the Trump
especially
story.
now looking back on it when you know there's a lot more information now.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning of the actual impeachment part, okay? Go back to when Bill Clinton is in is in the governor's mansion of Arkansas. And you have to understand, Bill Clinton was always poor. He was the poorest president ever elected, which is hilarious because he was, and he even says this in one of these documentaries, he's like, I'm the poorest president ever elected, and every time I make money or lose money, I'm criticized for it. You know, how does somebody who is a poor president, how do I not get how do I get this massive amount of scrutiny when a rich president like George Bush, nobody ever talks about how Prescott Bush made his money, Tad.
Oh, I believe there's something to do with like funding Nazis there, if I'm not mistaken.
Laundering Nazi money. George H.W. The Bush fortune was made on laundering Nazi money.
And before that, it was
in Mexico.
If I'm not mistaken, it was railroads is what he did.
I think so.
In Pennsylvania.
There's some connection, but that's the point. Is like, hey, I'm a poor president. Why are you picking on me? And it all goes back to when he was president. There is a So Hillary Clinton talked about the vast right-wing conspiracy.
Well, the original Alex Jones was Rush Limbaugh. I mean, if you go back in time, and it was, you know, the vast right-wing conspiracy, which is hilarious if you go back and you watch the tapes of when she said that, and everybody was outraged. But I don't know.
So because Clinton was an unknown, the more unknown a president is, the more hardcore the press and the establishment press goes on that particular person. And so because Bill Clinton wasn't really known, and he had been on Carson in like the 80s, you know, are you going to run for president? So everybody was kind of anticipating this guy would run for president. So a lot of Republican operatives and Washington established media would go to Arkansas hunting for stories about this president.
A little opposition research never hurt anyone.
And so they'd go to this guy named Larry Crane, who was just this crackpot guy who'd tape everybody, or Larry Nichols, who was fired by Clinton for sending money to the Sandinistas. And they would dig up all these...
Do a whole podcast on Mina.
Dude, the
whole series.
The Clinton conspiracy documentaries that I've got in the show notes are awesome. And going back to these early 90s documentaries detailing the crimes of the Clintons is hysterical. You know, one of them was ADFA, the Arkansas Development Fund, something or other. And so the theory is, see if this sounds familiar, Bill Clinton starts as governor this ADFA ADFA organization. And basically what this does is it's to create jobs and to invest in the state, and it gives grants to corporations.
How could this ever go wrong?
Gives state grants to corporations to come in and invest in the company, in the state. And it's been described as Bill's slush fund, because he would personally grant to businesses these loans and bonds, and then they were required to give back campaign contributions to his campaign. Does that sound like anything familiar, Tad?
No.
Clinton Foundation? Yeah, right, yeah. And so, but Larry Nichols in this Clinton conspiracy or whatever documentary the Clinton Chronicles takes it one step further. He's like, no, the CIA had a base of cocaine trafficking in Arkansas,
laundering the drug money,
and so the ADFA existed to launder the money from the CIA's drug trafficking, and the person that was in charge of all of it was Bill Clinton's best friend, who also employed Roger Clinton as a driver. And so the CIA would go and sell drugs to Latin American countries. They'd need to launder the money. And then the banks from around the nation would take this money out. And then when it was kind of discovered, that's when Roger Clinton gets arrested for coke. So there's a whole layer of conspiracy that goes back.
Oh, but yeah, I mean, and then funding the Sandinistas, too. I mean, is what the money was for, to buy... Hell, they were training them in me.
Now, Paul Begala, who was on the 92 Clinton campaign, there's a great documentary on YouTube called The War Room that kind of outlines George Stephanopoulos, who is the main political reporter for ABC News. He was the press guy for Clinton's 92 campaign, and James Carville, who I love, who's hilarious.
Carville's funny.
He doesn't give an F.
No,
but they kind of... what was I talking about? Paul Begala basically says, you know, I love Andy Griffith because there's all these Mayberry people And then you get some out-of-town city slicker who comes into town with their Ivy League degrees, and then the local yokels just completely spin them all around and understand the lay of the land better. And he's like, that's what happened in Arkansas. All these bumpkins like Larry Nichols and all these guys who just sold all of these stories, these nut jobs, were able. And if you're involved in local politics, every state has their own like crazy, like here in Indiana, Paul Ogden or Melissa Donahue or Crazy Larry here in Indianapolis, these kind of gadfly people who have an alternative view of how politics works. They're a little conspiratorial, a little different, but if out-of-towners come in and they don't know any better, they take these people seriously, and then all of a sudden, if you listen to Paul Ogden, for instance, here in Indiana, he has a totally different view of like our friend Abdul Hakim Shabazz, like, who was a very establishment person. And usually, Abdul's usually in the room when these things are happening, and Ogden's not, and so that's kind of what happened here. That's what I kind of come down. But I also kind of think that ADFA thing sounds legit. That
there's an awful lot of smoke around any one of the Clinton conspiracies.
That's exactly right.
The A&E documentary, it was put that the Clintons do a damn good job of acting guilty even if they're not.
Yes.
Is what it was, one of the great quotes from that. I can't remember who said that. It actually may have been Blumenthal. Or it was one of their lawyers or something.
Yeah.
But they act guilty.
One of their lawyers from this period, Lanny Davis.
Yeah.
You know who Lanny is representing right now?
If I'm not mistaken, it is Michael Cohen.
Yes, he is Michael Cohen's lawyer.
Yeah. There's a small circle of very well-connected people.
So 2 of the Clintons' best friends at this time period are James McDougal and Susan McDougal.
Mm-hmm.
And
James McDougal
he's a character, man.
There's a whole nother podcast. I mean, that guy is.
And Susan is like young and attractive. She said, I met James McDougal when I was 19. He must have been in his 30s or 40s at that point.
Oh, hell, yeah.
And she goes, how'd he just talk like a book? And I fell in love with him.
He's kind of the hillbilly Donald Trump, honestly.
He is. He's a character. He died in 99, 98. And so he was a manic depressive. He was just kind of this wild guy. He was always into something. He's one of those guys who's just got a new scheme every moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so
business partners with the Clintons.
Susan McDougal said, I went and I found this piece of property by the White River, and it was this great fishing location. It was this beautiful property. And went back to James. I said, we should develop this for, luxury purposes. They went to the Clintons. The Clintons invested a little money. They were poor. They were always kind of not doing well. But it begins with, in 1978, they purchased a piece of this property in conjunction with the McDougals and some banking associates. And they were going to build vacation homes on the Whitewater estates, or perhaps hold on to the land until it could be turned into a profit. And so between 78 and 86, one model home had been built, but hundreds of loans, deposits, and transactions had occurred on behalf of the property. A Resolution Trust Corporation investigator, L. Gene Lewis, found evidence of money laundering.
And if I do believe they were all being ran through the law firm that she was
the Rose Law Firm, all of the deeds, and that was part of the ADFA thing too, is that anybody who wanted to
had to retain Hillary.
Yes, and so if you wanted to apply for the state grant, then you had to go to the Rose Law Firm, pay $50,000,
which was only 2 people, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was Hillary and
Vince Foster. He worked there. What's the
I can't remember the guy's name.
Weeb Garland. What's the guy's real weird name?
I can't remember.
So, but
so many names in my head.
Somebody makes the point, like there were like 5 or 6 other law firms in Arkansas who were better at bond issuance than the Rose Law Firm, but somehow they were the ones that you had to contract with.
Somehow
that had to get these different things done. And so Webb Hubbell's who I'm thinking
Webb
of.
Hubbell.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. Weeb.
Webb Hubbell Webb Hubbell was part of the Rose Law Firm, longtime Clinton ally. he basically got pinched for something, and in exchange for his silence, Vernon Jordan got him a job. Vernon Jordan was a lawyer in D.C., big
Bill's friend.
Yes, got him a job at Revlon. Later on, Monica Lewinsky would get a job leaving Washington, D.C., working for Revlon, and part of being called the new Webb Hubble was a part of the reason that she acted so erratically. So money laundering is the concealment of the origins of illegally obtained money, typically by means of transfers involving foreign banks or legitimate businesses. For example, if you sell $400 worth of drugs, go to a car dealership, put that $400 down as down payment on a car, pull out of the transaction, and then get a check for $400, you have now a $400 legitimate check from a legit car dealership instead of $400 in cash of illegitimate money. So if you think back to Breaking Bad, why did they run a car wash? Oh, okay. Well,
you got to run a cash business.
You got to run a cash business. So
Ozark's a great show if you like money laundering.
Part of the reason that several states are considering making cash illegal now. There are some cities in the United States that are moving towards making cash illegal. So
it'll keep us safe.
Yeah, so Breaking Bad, they ran a car wash, so you run through an extra 100 a day, and then you can legitimize some of that cash and pay taxes on it and look like a good, upstanding citizen. So the laundering in this particular case happened from a variety of sources and went to an equally various amounts of recipients. Eventually, this property, Whitewater, that initially cost $203,000, had loans against it in the millions. After the front was finally exposed, the closure cost the taxpayers $78 million due to the combination of missing money, phony accounts, and fraudulent loans. Now, in 92, when Bill Clinton became president, and he issued 14 executive privilege orders in relation to the Whitewater scandal.
Mm-hmm.
Executive privilege is the power of the president to resist certain subpoenas and other investigations by the legislative and judicial branches of government in pursuit of information or personnel relating to the executive. This power was established in order to protect the identities of spies and the need for secrecy of military operations. But the Supreme
or your money laundering scheme.
Right. But the Supreme Court under Nixon made a ruling that established a caveat that the president did not have to explain how the information might be sensitive or who it might protect. Simply, the president needs to say executive privilege, and unless the prosecution can demonstrate that there is a 0% chance that the information is classified for a good reason, he or she can resist any subpoena or suppress any testimony. Special thanks to Hody Johns for helping with this section of the prep. By 92, Clinton was able to issue these orders. So there was already a good amount of evidence that had come forward, though. In 93, Vince Foster, who had the documents that linked the Clintons to Whitewaters, killed himself after his suicide.
Went off and got suicided.
But before paramedics and police arrived on the scene, the documents and no valuables were stolen from the office. And so Ken Starr, at one point, uses the death of Vince Foster because he knows that Vince Foster, he's part of the reason that there was the inflammation of this conspiracy theory that the Clintons actually kill people. Because he said the death of Vince Foster seems suspicious, and so we need to investigate this piece of the Whitewater part so we can actually get access to the records of all the people that worked at the Rose Law Firm.
Yeah, and they were looking, if I'm not mistaken, they were looking for payments, who was signing off on the payments, and at one point, Hillary's name was...
Her fingerprints were literally on the documents.
Yeah.
So after a period of time, she does come back and say, "Oh, guess what I found? We were moving some things in the East Wing, and we found these."
they found it in the White House. I mean, it's like, what?
Right. Ken Starr later uses it. The special counsel has not been appointed yet.
No.
But later on, Rush Limbaugh helps kind of throw this Vince Foster stuff into. I remember hearing the Clintons kill people as a kid.
The Clinton body count.
Yeah, because I was in like 4th or 5th grade, so my grandma would take me out listening to Rush Limbaugh, and we'd go to the O'Malley's and get some, gummy worms. I'd be like, "Who's Vince Foster, and why did he get killed, Grandma?"
Because if you got information leading to the arrest of Hillary Clinton, you always end up getting suicided.
That's right.
Still to this day.
So after the suicide, and due to the suspicions regarding the unprecedented number of orders. In 94, the Clinton administration ordered an independent investigator to look at the Clintons. So they hire Janet Reno appoints this guy named Robert Fisk. Robert Fisk was this person who was head of the Bar Association, former Republican, very well-respected swamp rat. And he was, I forget why, I think he has it in here. It was discovered that Clinton's own Attorney General, Janet Reno, had selected him. No longer having the trust of the Congress after this, the House took control of the investigation and appointed Kenneth Starr to take over the investigation. I thought that, Sessions and Rosenstein appointed Mueller. I thought I didn't realize that it was some sort of conflict of interest if your Attorney General had something to do with it, but maybe I'm missing something there.
As far as in the Fisk appointment?
In
I
the
think
Fisk
the
appointment.
House made a giant... Newt was raising hell about it.
So when Newt gets elected in 94, and he gets a lot of flack now, because there's this new book by an MSNBC contributor called Red and Blue or something. It's about the divide and how partisan politics started in 1994, which...
It all started in 94.
It all started in 94 with the Republicans. Never mind the things Lyndon Johnson did to Goldwater, or that FDR did to his opponents, or the things that happened in the 1800 election. It's always the Republicans in 1994. But you had a new Congress who was,
because they were just out to get Clinton from the beginning.
The Republicans finally started fighting back, and that's always why he gets the blame. But the Republicans caught the Congress in 94 for the first time in 40 years. And so it was a new phenomena in a couple generations, because it had always been sympathetic to the Democrats in the House side. Mm-hmm. So the Republicans come in and say, well, we're going to start, much like you see the Democrats now. Yeah. The Democrats take over.
Oh, it's going to be an exact...
Yes.
It's going to be an exact repeat of history once come January 15th.
That's right. The opposite party takes the House, and then now what do you see Maxine Waters and Adam Schiff and all these people saying we're going to do? We're going to get to the bottom. All the
only thing is they've got 2-year head start with the Mueller investigation already.
That's exactly right. So in 94, that's when this gets appointed. But yeah, there's been an investigation from the very beginning into Trump under a Republican-controlled Congress and presidency. So let's actually take a look at this. This is from The Hunting of the President. This is from an unidentified news report at the time, but this is who the Republicans and how basically Kenneth Starr gets appointed after Robert Fisk. This sort of like Mueller. Say what you want about Robert Mueller. I think he is somebody that is kind of an honorable person. He has a clean reputation with many of the people in Washington, D.C. Our own correspondent in the swamp, Rob Cortell, says he's an upstanding guy. So it's not like he's a partisan hack. He's not a partisan Democrat who's trying to hack away. And that's who Robert Fisk was. And then along comes Kenneth Starr.
Kenneth Starr's history of partisan Republican activity is not the only thing troubling Democrats. The way Starr got the job, which bears the political footprints of every Republican president from Nixon to Bush, is also becoming a hot issue. Independent counsels are chosen by a panel of 3 federal appeals court judges. By law, the panel is selected by Chief Justice Rehnquist, a Nixon appointee to the Supreme Court named Chief Justice by President Reagan. Rehnquist chose Judge David Sentel of the D.C. Court of Appeals, a Reagan appointee, to head the 3-judge panel. Sentel is from North Carolina, where he was an active worker in the Republican organization run by Senator Jesse Helms, who is among Mr. Clinton's fiercest critics. Sentel owes his job on the federal bench to Helms, who urged the Reagan White House to appoint him. Sentel's 2 most famous rulings overturned the Iran-Contra convictions of Oliver North and John Poindexter. The Sentel panel last week decided to replace independent counsel Robert Fisk with Kenneth Starr, saying a change was needed to ensure the appearance of a truly independent investigation. Nothing wrong with Fisk, the judge said, just a perception problem. Time out.
Ken Starr came to the job of independent counsel as a known Republican political and legal operative. He had spoken out for Paula Jones in her lawsuit against Bill Clinton. He had lost his job as Solicitor General when Bill Clinton was elected president. And he was a walking appearance of conflict of interest. Perhaps, as a legal conflict of interest as well. But if you were to design someone who had a clear axe to grind with Bill Clinton, it would have been Ken Starr.
So this is the problem with appointing somebody who is even has the appearance of being partisan. All of a sudden, everything turns, and now the investigation is tainted and it looks like a witch hunt.
Well, that's the whole problem with the special counsel investigations, and you'll listen to various lawyers, and they'll talk about it. Any honest one will talk about it and say there's really no need for it when the House can do an investigation the proper way. I mean, if you are going to appoint someone, you would say you want to get somebody as far away from
partisan
DC,
politics,
someone out in Utah or something. A judge, maybe a attorney general or something, or someone who hasn't been appointed or that worked in DC or has an axe to grind, like you say. But I mean, when you look at the Mueller being appointed and then Ken Starr, I mean, it's kind of crazy. Just the whole, your job is to find dirt, and they're going to find dirt. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is or where it leads, especially with the no scope being defined in the Mueller.
At least in the Starr investigation, it was find out what happened with the Clintons and Whitewater. Were they profiting off of something? But to what?
But it didn't in there.
But right.
Everything.
Eventually, in 2004, when the investigation is closed down, you heard that right. It lasted over 10 years, cost over $70 million, hundreds of FBI agents and investigators.
Found nothing.
They found nothing.
Well, it wasn't that they found anything. There wasn't any substantial evidence to corroborate a crime, basically.
Convict, right. There were...
Waste of damn time.
Bill and Hillary committed tax fraud and some other things that we'll recap in a moment. But in this little section, I want to play you some stuff because I want to kind of set up what happened under Starr, because I think it's important as you start to hear about people like Jerome Corsi, and he lied under testimony, and you hear with,
Well, if you talk to the FBI, you're getting
right.
You're going to perjure yourself.
Like Michael Cohen, for instance, says, I said, that project ended, I think, in January, and then they came back and said, no, it ended in June. There's emails, and then you're convicted of lying. So anything can happen. So I really want to. I don't think that
the process crimes are more serious than the actual crime that was committed.
I don't think that Robert Mueller is Ken Starr. I think that Ken Starr was worse. He seems to be a complete douche.
Well, I think the underlying difference is that the FISA warrant is a major breach of.
Yeah, going after Carter Page, and then the FISA warrant is totally different in that a FISA warrant is basically going to a secret court and saying, there could be some sort of illegal international issue going on here. We need a secret surveillance.
We suspect 4 individuals to be on and basing it on a opposition research paper to get the paid for, obviously, by the Clintons, and that's the issue with the Russia investigation right now. In my mind, it's not that whether or not Mueller finds a crime.
Right.
It's if you look at Whitewater, obviously they're both politically motivated.
Right.
I think there was more. Mueller, there wasn't even a crime outline in the Russia investigation.
Mm-hmm.
A collusion with Russia, or they interfered with an election. Okay, but just the rabbit hole that it went down, and how the FISA warrants were for people who worked for Trump or were in the administration. I guess not administration, but the campaign.
Right.
It looks an awful lot like a setup, honestly. But who knows? Well, I think once if that ever comes to light, it'll be a major difference from the Whitewater, which that was obviously it was political, appointing Ken Starr, and he's going to find some shit. But
yeah, so let's hear who makes up his team.
Oh,
because you're going to hear some of these names.
It's a good history lesson to go back and to look at who all the players were. Not the major players, but the
minor players,
the behind the scenes.
One of
guys.
them is Brett Kavanaugh, which we'll talk about in a moment. But the thing about the approach, the approach is very much the same. So when you hear Michael Cohen or Mike Flynn or any of these various people lied or did this under oath or that under oath, I want you to hear their tactics. I want you to never talk to the cops without your lawyer. You're going to hear that, especially with Monica Lewinsky, how that changes. But let's start with the guys who are on the particular team. This is from Hunting the President.
When you listen to Kenneth Starr and his warriors, they sound so gentlemanly.
Our job is to get at the truth, and the truth will speak for itself. So thank you very much.
But many of the lawyers working for Starr are known for everything but gentleness. They have reputations as some of the toughest prosecutors in the nation who are proud of successfully prosecuting high public officials for wrongdoing. Jackie Bennett, a Justice Department public integrity prosecutor, has 2 big trophies: convictions of a former Minnesota senator and a Texas congressman. Hickman Ewing, lead counsel in Little Rock, brought down a Tennessee governor and 10 sheriffs while he was a U.S. attorney. Bruce Udolph nailed more than a dozen judges, mayors, and cops for corruption while U.S. attorney in Miami. But earlier in his career, Udolph was sued and found guilty of violating a defendant's constitutional rights. Michael Emick from the U.S. Attorney's Office in L.A. In 1994, a judge attacked Emick and his prosecutors for being callous, coercive, and vindictive in their tactics to get a woman to testify against her ex-husband.
That Mike Emick is, you keep that in the back of your mind because we're going to hear about him later on. Bruce Udall is actually a guy who quit the Starr investigation at a certain point because his conscience can't take it anymore. Let's go to, now this is Susan McDougal. Susan McDougal was involved in the Whitewater affair, and it goes on for months, and at some point she is asked to come speak to the council. And I want you to hear, these are a little longer, but I think it's important for you to hear how the special counsel in the Starr case handled her and what ended up happening, because it could be, I'm not saying it is, but it could be relevant to what we hear in the news today. So this is Susan McDougal in Hunting for the President.
I had gotten a grand jury subpoena, and it really didn't worry me at all. I was happy to go before the grand jury because there was no doubt in my mind that the David Hale story was a lie. I called Bobby McDaniel.
Now, you may hear her say OIC, and that's that's basically the Ken Starr Office of the Independent Counsel.
In Arkansas, who was a friend of a friend. And he said, we'll go in there and let me do all the talking.
And just in case you don't know what a grand jury is, that's basically a secret court, basically, where you go in front of a dozen to 24 different people, and the prosecutor will lay out their case in front of the grand jury. And then the grand jury will vote and say, yes, there is enough evidence to indict this person. And so instead of a prosecutor just outright saying, I'm going to charge this person, which they can do.
Because it's relevant to the investigation.
Right. But sometimes it gives them a little bit more weight when a jury, or they're testing ahead of time to see what charges may or may not work. That's why you hear. It's part of the reason that you may never see the Mueller report is he's doing so much with the grand jury that testimony's sealed, and unless a court unseals it, you can't read it. But that's why you're seeing a lot of what's going on in the court documents. And there's been no leaks with Mueller, but when she's going before the grand jury, that is the independent counsel basically taking testimony to present to a grand jury. She's going to go talk to the grand jury as part of this case that they're building against Bill and Hillary Clinton.
And when we find out what the questions are and what the documents are, then you and I'll talk, and we'll go back in, and you can tell them if I think it's appropriate. And so that was our plan. There were probably, I'm going to say, 5 OIC and about 3 FBI agents. And when we walked in the room, one of the OIC guys said, don't sit on that side of the table. there was a long conference table. He said, sit on the same side with us. We don't want to feel like, you know, we're adversarial. And I said, no, that's okay. It's probably more comfortable, you know, for you to show me things and we'll sit on this side of the table. And I thought that was very strange. And then the man said, we just want to tell you that we believe we can indict you and that we can convict you. But what we'd really like to do is do this plan that we have. And we do this for a living. This is what we do, and we do it very well. And they sort of laughed and said, we're paid big bucks to come up with the big plans. And I remember Bobby McDaniel looked at me, and I looked at Bobby McDaniel, and we were like, what is going on? And Bobby said, well, why don't we start this out, you know, like usual? Why don't you ask her some questions and let us talk about it? And they had a stack of documents on this long conference table. And Bobby said, why don't you show her what's in those papers and let's start at a starting point. And he took his hand and he pushed the papers away. And he said, that's not how we're going to do it today. He said, what we want from her is a proffer, and we can make her life very easy. I'd asked what a proffer was, and Bobby McDaniel said they want you to give them something on somebody, you know, that is wrong. And I said, well, I have to tell you, I'm going to have more details because I don't, you know of anything that anyone did wrong at all. And so I don't think I can help you. So they came back again and said, we want a proffer. We believe she knows certain details about the Clintons that she could help us with in our investigation, and that's what it's going to take. And I got up and left. I thought asking for a proffer, but when they'd never spoken to me, never asked me one question, was just out of line. And so they drove to Jonesboro, and they told Bobby McDaniel that they thought that we'd gotten off to the wrong foot, but that this was workable, and it was really the way it ought to go. And Bobby called me, and I said, there's not going to be a proffer, because that's what they wanted.
After Susan McDougal continues to refuse to give information to the independent counsel against Bill Clinton, the OIC brings charges against her, and she's ultimately convicted.
I got a phone call from Jim McDougal 3 days before my sentencing saying, you must call them. The independent counsel wants to speak with you. They've got a hell of a deal. You've got to promise me, if you do one thing, that you'll call and speak to them. So I drove up to Jonesboro to Bobby McDaniel's office, and I told him to call them. And they said, we have a really good deal that we can give her, and it's only good for today. The deal is that we will recommend probation to the judge. And again, I'd taken Claudia Riley with me, and she was sitting there, and I remember that we looked at each other because I had no money at all, and I didn't know how I was going to defend myself, and it sounded so good. And then he said, we've discussed it with Washington, and they are going to bring additional tax evasion charges against Susan, and they're setting a grand jury, and we can stop it as of 5 o'clock today.
Excuse me. So this is very common with what they do is they pile on charges, they'll add charges in an effort to get you to testify, to cooperate, to plead you down. So you'll get more and more charges to scare you, and then if they can scare you enough, then they can get you to cooperate and do what they want. At one point, Jim McDougal calls her and says, hey, do this, and she says, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to talk. There's nothing. I'm not going to lie. And she goes, I don't even know what I would tell them. And McDougal says to her, they'll tell you. They'll tell you what the story is.
Yeah.
They'll tell you what story you're agreeing to. She mentions Claudia Riley. She is the wife of Democratic governor in Arkansas. We'll hear from her in this little piece in a moment. But Claudia Riley was very influential in, her husband was very influential in Arkansas politics, and she was very close to the Clintons and the McDougals. She's an older lady.
If she will give us the proffer. And Bobby McDaniel said, well, I hear what you're going to do for her. What do you want from her? And he said, she knows who this investigation is about, and she knows what we want. And I started to cry.
I said, Susan, tell them what they want. Give them what they want. Don't go to jail. Please don't go to jail. And she chastised me severely. She wept. She said, I can't believe that you're saying that. I can't believe that you, of all people. I said, then tell me why I should not have said it and why you're going to do what you're going to do, because you're going to jail. She said, I know I am.
We cried all through lunch, both of us, as we couldn't believe that I could be in that position. And so I called Pat Harris on the phone, who was an attorney, and his brother, Ron Harris. And Pat said, Susan, if you start to lie, if you begin to lie, you'll be lying for the rest of your life. If you lie now to save yourself, you will lie for the rest of your life. And so I told Bobby McDaniel not to call them back. I said, just don't call them back. And Claudia and I drove back to Camden to my mother's house. And I hadn't even opened the door to walk in my mother's house, and the phone was ringing. And it was Jim McDougal. And he said, if you don't take that offer, I will never speak to you again. And he never did. He hung the phone up, and I never spoke to him again.
Now, you're sitting there saying, yeah, but this is Susan McDougal. And I would say that when you watch the Clinton affair, or when you hear the clips that I'm going to play for you about Monica Lewinsky and how she was handled, the things that she was told, it's very, very similar in the way that these are two. And I would also say that in both of their cases, the emotions are like, if you've ever gone through something traumatic and you talk about it, the emotions are right at the top of your throat.
You can tell how serious it is.
Yes,
in the voices.
Yes,
even the interviews post
30 years later, they're talking about it, and Monica Lewinsky is just sitting there, and the emotions are just right there at the top of her throat because this happened. So the Starr investigation was just obsessed with sex. Listen to this clip from Claudia Riley.
When the Starr people dealt with me, at first it was superficially, they were very genial and very, very polite and treated me very decently. I think the thing that made me realize how dark this episode was going to become even worse was when they asked me if I had ever had sexual relations with the president. I'd like to go on record as of today, I'm 74 years old, and I have had a wonderful marriage and a wonderful husband. Not in my defense, I just frankly resented the question, but I very calmly said, he never asked me.
She's a great part of this. This is from The Hunting of the President. It's narrated by Morgan Freeman. There's a redo of it that I'm gonna rent, but the link to it on the Amazon Prime is in there. So what happens when Susan refuses to testify in the Whitewater trial? Well, this is what happens to her when she goes to prison.
There I was at Sybil Brand Institute on lockdown on Murderers Row, and at that jail you wore a red dress to indicate that you were on that row. Most of those women were there for killing their children. And so the red dress was this symbol to all the other inmates that you were a child killer. And so I was wearing the red dress, and whenever I would go down to visits, the other inmates would scream and yell and throw things, and they thought that I was one of the women who was there for murdering their kids. One of the worst things about that was going to court. When you wore the red dress, you went on the bus with all of the inmates, but you got locked in the center of the bus in a cage. And the people the other inmates thought that you were a child killer. So the men would masturbate into the cage. They would,
baby killers.
Try to, pull at your hair or, say horrible things. They would urinate. People would come by and spit on you, call you names. Just terrible. The trip in the bus, it was the most horrible part of being in jail. And so my attorney had gone to court and told them how I was being held, and the judge in the courtroom had ordered me released. And I'd gathered all my little things together in the cell, and I thought, my God, they're coming to get me, and they're going to take me to a less stringent jail. I wasn't getting out of jail, I was just being moved to a jail that had less restrictions. And I had everything gathered up, and the watch commander came by, and he said, we don't take our orders from some California judge. We take our orders from the independent counsel, and you're not going anywhere.
So she would serve 2 years for not talking, and amongst other charges. But I had you heard
they hit her with I believe it's the financial crimes.
Yeah, I think it's here in the notes, so we'll get to it as we move on with the notes. But I mean, what is your reaction? Had you heard any of that before?
I hadn't heard the audio. I do believe whoever mixed that should be fired, though. It's pretty horrendous.
It's not a great mix. Hopefully,
besides
it came
that,
through,
though, no, I saw in the Clinton affair that she pretty much got railroaded because she wasn't going to cooperate. Basically, when it comes to special counsel, it's you talk, and if we like what you hear, then you're cooperating, and if we don't like your version of the truth, then you're lying to us.
Yeah, and we're going to make your prison stay as awful as possible, or else. This is from you know, this is how they handled stuff in Arkansas. This is how this is from Max Brantley, the former editor-in-chief of the Arkansas Times.
Even people in Little Rock who don't like Bill Clinton very much thought that the Starr prosecution was out of control. That's because they knew people who'd been caught up in it in the most amazing ways. Functionaries at banks whose lives literally were ruined financially by being subjects of Starr's relentless search for anybody with anything that they could take against Bill Clinton. High school students rousted out of classes or attempted to be rousted out of classes in rural high schools in Arkansas. I mean, I don't think you can imagine what it would be like to go to a tiny rural high school out in the middle of the forest of the Ouachita Mountains and have an FBI agent show up at your school and say, I want to see this boy outside of class right now. Scary sort of police state kind of tactics that were used against people who knew nothing, who had nothing.
So, and let's do, this is just from one documentary. I watched about 5 and read a couple books and have the show prep and listen to, and this is fairly consistent.
Yeah, the honest, I think everyone pretty much agrees that it was out of control.
It was over the line, yeah.
I don't think anyone
and it was encouraged.
Disagrees.
It
with
was
that.
encouraged by a new overzealous Republican Congress, and it was, and I really feel that because Bill Clinton was such a gifted Democrat, that Republicans were threatened by him. I think that you have somebody who is naturally getting approval ratings over 60%. You know, he beats your Republican president in George H.W. Bush. He's young. He's energetic. He's a very threatening figure, I think, if you're a Republican in this time frame. And if you don't feel that you can fight him in a fair one-on-one scenario, then you need to do whatever you can to damage him. So appoint an overzealous special counsel. And I think there's some parallels to that with the Democrats of today. It's not that trust me, Donald Trump is no Bill Clinton. He is not a gifted well, he's a very gifted politician. He's not a gifted administrator, but he's somebody who not a lot sticks to Donald Trump. And so if you're going to get rid of this guy, then you're going to have to fight dirty. And then what better way than to use the tactics that were used against you? If you're Lanny Davis, if you're Sidney Blumenthal, if you're John Podesta, if you're Hillary Clinton, if you're the people who were the victims, quote unquote, of these tactics that lived through it, you saw how effective it was. So why not?
They had the blueprint. I mean, it's rather clear.
Let's take this Russia thing and turn it into a special investigation of the president. The press is going to play ball. The press loves this stuff.
No.
Yes.
No, they don't.
Yeah. No, they absolutely do.
The thing about the whole Russia narrative to me is what really stands out is that they weren't expecting Donald Trump to win.
Right.
This was not supposed to be an investigation into the president. This was supposed to be an investigation into
who hacked the Democrats?
No, it was to get back at Trump for running.
Right.
I mean, if you look at the timeline and the insurance policy, the famous stroke text message, it was to get back at him after the election because no one thought Donald Trump had a serious shot of winning the election. This was to ruin Donald Trump. It was to plant because honestly, you wouldn't have to have that much proof if you have a FISA warrant already and the Russia narrative going, especially with with Comey signing off on it and everything already in 2016 in the summer. And then if you think about it, after she would have won, they would have investigated anyway, and then there wouldn't have to be a whole lot of... You wouldn't hear anything about the FISA warrant or anything. All you would hear is that Carter Page was he's a known FBI, CIA asset. But
you would have never known Carter Page's name.
No, but it would have been individual. He would have been a spook, basically working inside the camp. But if you look at it from that angle, which I believe is the angle that they were trying to play, I mean, they were trying to lock Trump up.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want to lock him up after he brought out all the accusers, all the rape accusers before the debate? I mean, that.
Let's talk about the press during this era, because I want you to listen to how the press was treated if they had an alternate. If you came out and you said, listen, this Russia collusion thing is just a political ploy. Look at what's happened to Alan Dershowitz. He wrote a book called The Case Against Impeaching Trump. And Alan Dershowitz, one of the most liberal members of the elite classes, Harvard law professor, beloved by the left, until he actually said, no, Donald Trump, there's no grounds for impeachment here. This is all phony baloney. And he's been absolutely excoriated. Anybody who comes out and says this is a waste of time is absolutely killed.
Honestly, anyone who's just honest about it and gives their honest, from a legal standpoint, they get they get railroaded. It's quite funny.
So let's listen and see if that happened during the Bill Clinton era. This is again from The Hunting of the President.
Anyone who went against the grain was immediately labeled a Clinton supporter. Anyone who went against the...
Sorry, this is a former CNN journalist. I neglected to put his name in there, but you're going to hear Jeffrey Toobin in here. You're going to hear Howard Kurtz. You're going to hear James Carville and a few other folks.
The grain was immediately labeled a Clinton supporter. And, I mean, this was not only outside of CNN, this was in CNN. People started saying, hey, you become a Clinton apologist writing these stories. And, my response was, well, I think the obligation of the media may be to ascertain the truth of a story and report that, as opposed to joining in this huge gangbang that was taking place in the national media.
You couldn't be a self-respecting...
This is Jonathan Alter, who basically wrote an Obama book. There's a hagiography. I mean, this guy is a very left-leaning guy in the press. I forget where he works now, but somebody that I listen to, but I recognize that he's a left-leaning journalist.
Member or aspiring member of the Washington establishment. And
I'm sorry, that's Carville.
That's Carville.
Then James Alter.
Have a favorable opinion of Clinton, unless you are a Clinton appointee, but just not like a journalist, no. And they would like, I remember that some journalists were reassigned, or people would get the moniker a Clinton journalist. And that would happen to people.
If you stood up and said there was nothing there, the immediate rejoinder in the talking heads culture was, oh, well, you're in the tank. You're a Clinton apologist. We all know that where there's smoke, there's fire. How could they have been investigating this all these years? Well, maybe he's technically not going to be indicted, but there are plenty of other, leads to follow.
President Clinton was an easy way to make your career and to protect yourself from being attacked by the conservative press corps, which was now, at that point, very powerful.
It was astonishing to me that, that this new media food chain was being created right before our eyes. That, it would start...
This is Bagala talking about basically Rush Limbaugh.
Start maybe in the really ultra-right-wing publications, maybe even overseas in Great Britain, and then sort of jump up to the next level, and then the next, and somewhere in there would be the Matt Drudge gossip internet column, and then come David Brock and the American Spectator, and then before you knew it, it was the front page of the New York Times, and before you knew it, it's on the floor of the United States Senate. And it was all spun up out of nothing.
The reason...
And that is something that happens still to this day. Like, it starts with some liberal journalist. It starts with Media Matters, run by David Brock. David Brock is an interesting liar. He is a person who worked for the American Spectator, which was very anti-Clinton. and he would be paid by conservative billionaires to go down and he
dig
would
up dirt.
He'd dig up dirt in Arkansas, and then David Brock would write these articles about all the
sheriffs going out and grooming women for
yes,
Bill
and all the women that he would have an affair with, and then at some point he saw the light, and David Brock found Media Matters now. And so during the Clinton era, he was the progenitor of all of the gossipy right-leaning stuff. Now he's the progenitor of all the gossipy left-leaning stuff, of the identity politics stuff. If you go and watch Media Matters, watch it. It starts at Media Matters. It goes to a blog like Huffington Post or Raw Story, and then it gets repeated a few hundred times. It gets tweeted out a few thousand times, and then it gets picked up in the New York Times or the Washington Post and treated as a serious story. Then it has been lended the credibility of those institutions, and then it starts getting picked up by politicians, and then it ends up on the House floor. So we're seeing the same thing. And you see that same, well, there's smoke, so there must be fire sort of thing. With Donald Trump, you see, well, there's been 17 people indicted under this. It's like, yeah, for crimes in 2006. And so you see people conflating different things and using the ignorance of the consumer, of the media consumer.
Today it's all headlines, too.
Exactly.
Nobody reads.
Nobody
reads
the
or
articles.
goes to the source. And
right.
David Brock, you got to love him.
He's trash.
The reason that it got out of hand was it was all related back to Watergate. And that was the sort of glory time of Washington establishment. That's when big reputations of big people were made. And all of these people at the Times and the Post and everybody thought, hey, this might be another Watergate. And no one wanted to get left behind.
Sometimes people would talk about Whitewater and they would slip and they would use the word Watergate. And I'd always thought that was telling because for a younger generation of journalists, maybe this was their Watergate.
I think that the Watergate perpetrators were brought to justice in part because of the press.
What's the matter with these clowns?
And that the media had changed a lot since Watergate and found itself all too often in cahoots with the perpetrators of dirty tricks in Whitewater.
So I've said that Watergate thing a million times. Like, all these young journalists want to be the first to break the scoop and be the new Woodward and Bernstein. They all grew up watching, to All the President's Men and wanting to be that. I'm one of those people. I was like, oh, I want to be a journalist.
It's worse now because it's all gonzo journalism.
Exactly, right.
It's all about, the journalist first.
And in this next clip, you hear the pressure to make up stories to make your bones. And then another thing that I've said, remember how I've said tweets aren't news? Well, in this clip, you'll hear kind of the 1990s version of that taking place.
The media thrive on conflict, scandal, sex. That's not to say they don't do some...
This documentary.
He basically said the media thrives on conflict, sex, stuff we know. Yeah, I know.
Stories on other things. But you had a perfect meeting here between the Clinton story and the demands of the media in the 1990s.
We were not truth tellers. We were scandal mongers. I mean, you literally had a lynch mob arrive in Little Rock seeking to create the name for themselves, to win their Peabody, win their Pulitzer, win their awards by coming up with the story that was going to bring down the presidency.
Put yourself in the shoes of a reporter in this period. The competing newspaper has broken some kind of story on Whitewater. His editor says, go down to Arkansas, see if you can match it, see what you can find. They get an expense account, they go to the Capitol Hotel for, 10 days. They come back. If they're empty-handed, if they don't have a story, it's not good for their career. Lose a little face. So I'm not saying that causes them to make up a story, but it can, in the real world, cause them to cut some corners on sourcing.
Suddenly, the old standard about you need 2 sources to put something in the paper, well, suddenly that was replaced by the no-source rule. Well, it was out there. Somebody else had it. It's being discussed. It was in some magazine. It was on a website.
The bar of the Capitol Hotel kind of became a press club for quite a while. And one night, Jenny Carroll of Newsweek and I were sitting over there. And after Jenny had, she would admit, a couple of scotches, turned to me in something akin to just real frustration. And Jenny was very good with documents. I mean, she knew she was a good reporter. And she turned to me and said, I am trying to tell my editors there is no there there. But they keep pushing me.
So, I mean, there you have it. I mean, we see it today. It's what is going to get clicks? What is going to get eyeballs?
24-hour news cycle.
It's a 24-hour news cycle. So, yeah, I think you see it today. So, Starr investigation proceeds on, and at the they had some successes. So, while Starr was not allowed to investigate any transactions involving the Clintons, the transactions of his staff, both current and former, yielded results based on information received prior to 92. 15 persons eventually working for the Clintons were not just indicted but convicted of 37 felonies, including bribery, fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, perjury, and embezzlement. 4 of them had either refused to testify or perjured themselves on behalf of Clinton and were pardoned of their crimes. Bill and Hillary were found to have committed tax fraud, and when they quote-unquote claimed improper tax deductions for interest payments made by the Whitewater Development Company. But the statute of limitations had expired. The fraud had occurred throughout the 80s. They claimed it was an honest mistake and paid the IRS $4,900 in restitutions. Though the amount owed was far greater than this, it seemed as a gesture of good faith, and they didn't have to pay it at all. In 95, Starr publicly released a statement that showed both Bill and Hillary not only knew about the improper deductions, but they personally made them. The investigation eventually wrapped up in the year 2000, with Robert Ray replacing Kenneth Starr in the very final year. He admitted that the evidence was insufficient to prove to a jury, but he also argued that the combination of pardons, executive privilege orders, and over $60 million in buyouts to witnesses from the Clintons and their affiliates made the truth impossible to find. So now that's the end of the Whitewater part. That's why the investigation was started. So you're sitting here going, what the hell did he get impeached for? What you spent an hour on all this? What is he actually?
Yeah, it's crazy when the background takes an hour and then it doesn't even
it doesn't even matter
because there's nothing.
But
there's literally nothing there.
That's part of it. Overwhelm the system, and then it confuses everybody.
Well, it's also once you get started, you get a bloodhound on a scent.
Right. So you would have never found out about Monica Lewinsky had it not been for this different.
Well, that was the civil suit that was it Flowers that brought it against him?
No, it's Paula Jones.
Paula Jones,
right?
Yeah.
So he actually was meticulous in settling privately, and he settled with 12 different women over the course of 48 years.
Yeah.
But a recipient popped up when Starr was tracing the money from Whitewater, Paula Jones. This name led to a few other women that Clinton had either unofficially settled with or not yet settled with.
Well, her lawyer, the whole thing about it was her lawyer was trying to build the case, show that, because I believe she worked for him at the time as governor. And
so Paula Jones was the receptionist at an event that Clinton was at, and he asked an aide, one of the troopers, to bring Paula Jones up to his suite. And then he basically asked her for oral sex, and she left.
I remember the lawyer wanting to build the case that Bill had the history of improper using his abuse of power, using his office as a holding it over the women to make him look like a serial.
So he's a governor who is soliciting oral sex from a state employee.
I think he was even doing it as Attorney General, I believe.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken.
Well, there's a long.
Well, yeah, I would get them confused. I get all the women confused.
There's a long record. He was a serial philanderer. Actually, Gerald Ford urged Clinton to seek help for a sex addiction at one point. His Betty Ford ran the addiction clinic. He's like, "You've got an addiction, son.
We'll comp you."
But you have Paula Jones basically saying, I was sexually harassed. I felt pressured. He did it with Kathleen Willey. He called her into the Oval Office at one point. She came in to ask for a job, and he groped her. So she sued Clinton for like $750,000, basically alleging sexual harassment.
I think she was originally just wanting a public apology, but Bill wouldn't even acknowledge that they even met.
Yes.
So then they ended up the whole Linda Tripp and
So
all
hold on,
that,
you're jumping
I
ahead.
know,
Let me-
I know.
like, hold on.
I know. You need to get the
Yeah, so let me get get to the point where we can unpack this a little. So that led to a few other women. So they were looking into the sex, because it's sexy, but also into bribery and as part of it. So you know, at one point Juanita Broderick accused him of rape. I think that was while he was president. Some women like Marky Post. Did you know this? Marky Post, who was on Night Court, who was the spunky female lead on Night Court, has, we used to stay in the Lincoln bedroom and have foursomes. And Elizabeth Grayson, a former Miss America, said that she had an affair with him, openly admitted to having affairs with him, but didn't seek monetary gain. He had already had the reputation of a sex addict. In 91, even before names like Jones, Flowers, and Lewinsky emerged, Clinton described the quote-unquote bimbo eruption. That's what Hillary the bimbo eruption. Jones herself was not a useful witness, and since her alleged payments from the Whitewater scandal had subsequently turned into an in-process investigation. So in 94, a recorded interview with Clinton took place where he interviewed under oath pertaining to Jones. In it, he denied any other sexual misconduct charges aside from exposing himself to Jones. This included the denying of involvement with Monica Lewinsky, even when he was specifically asked about her.
Well, when you watch the tapes, I would highly suggest going and watching them, because as soon as they bring up her name,
his
demeanor immediately changes. He starts getting a frog in his throat, and then the whole what really got him was the gifts that they were exchanging.
Yes,
and then honestly, he pretty much got impeached because he lied about giving her a hat pin, basically, and receiving cigars. I mean, it's what it boils down to.
Yeah, so
in all
Clinton had settled with all these different women, but he didn't or wouldn't settle with Paula Jones for whatever reason. I think it's because he was after he was the president that he was like, I've got to fight this. And so by fighting it, he didn't realize that the Paula Jones defense team knew about Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky was a 22-year-old intern who was working in the White House. Jennifer Palmieri, at one point weeps that she did this to Monica, introduced her to Clinton. They carried on an affair for years. I thought it was like a one or two time. No, it was a years-long affair, and not many people knew about it except for Linda Tripp. Linda Tripp was this woman. So Lewinsky was basically hanging around too much in the White House, around the Oval Office.
She didn't have the credentials.
She was working for legislative affairs. Started as an intern, then went to work in the executive office building across from the White House.
She was supposed to work in the East Wing, I believe.
Yes.
Where she was working.
She was supposed to work in the East Wing, but then they had a government shutdown, and so
they had the interns running everything.
Yes. And so she was working really closely with Clinton. He started making passes, and she had a crush on him. And so they ended up hooking up during the government shutdown, and I think it was in 94. And then
it started in 94.
So she moves over to legislative affairs. She had a blue pass, so she was able to come in and out of the White House. He would call her, and she'd come over. Eventually,
It's really fascinating because she had no... I mean, this was 94, so there were no cell phones, really.
Right.
And then it was him getting a hold of her. She had to sit by her phone, basically.
She said she would go in on the weekends and just sit in her office waiting for him to call. That's crazy. So she ends up, before the 96 election, sometime in 96, they're like, she's coming around too much. We all they're like, we didn't know what was going on, which I think is bullcrap. I think they all knew what was going on.
Yeah,
otherwise they wouldn't have moved her to the Pentagon.
His secretary knew for sure.
Yeah.
I forget what her name is.
Betsy?
Betty?
Betty?
Betty
Yeah.
something. Betty.
It's in the notes later on.
Yeah.
So in 96, she moves over to the Pentagon, and she starts working with this woman named Linda Tripp, who is, in the Clinton affair, the most grotesque person out of all these people.
Her story is... You probably do a whole podcast on just her. And
right.
if I'm not mistaken, she was originally in the White House, and then once Clinton took over,
she worked at there
George Bush.
Yeah, she
correct?
worked under Bush, and then she went under the Pentagon and the communications.
She got
department.
moved once
Yeah.
Clinton took over, so she kind of had an axe to grind.
Because she was in the White House, and then Clinton moved her, so she was pissed. And then Monica gets moved over
Just
to the Pentagon.
happenstance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they
I
end
mean-
up in the communications office together. She's flying around overseas with all the press corps. So a lot of the press corps kind of knew Lewinsky when all this happened. Gosh, who was the
She was the secretary to the what was his name,
the defense secretary?
Yeah.
The guy that wore the bow tie.
Yeah.
I think it was Jake Tapper. She went on a date with Jake Tapper before this all happened.
Really?
She was blowing the president while going on a date with Jake Tapper. What a world.
Different times.
So, essentially, Linda Tripp wants to make money off of this. She had contacted, of all people, Lucinda Goldberg, Jonah Goldberg's mom, a year before, trying to sell a book. And she's like, I just don't think this is very interesting. A year later, she calls and she says, I think I might have something interesting. And so this is when the elves pop up. And I think there's some names in the elves that you'll recognize. And let's put on our conspiracy hat at the end. So the elves, of which Lucinda Goldberg was one, Ann Coulter was one, a conservative pundit. George Conway and Kellyanne Conway were part of the elves. George and Brett Kavanaugh were part of the elves. They were lawyers who worked for this law firm. And Kavanaugh worked on the Starr investigation, but left and went to work for, it wasn't Kleiner, I think it was something, but he went to work for this law firm, but he maintained close contact
with the council.
With the council. But the social circle all started talking. They were all friends. And they find out about Linda Tripp, who has these tapes of talking with Monica Lewinsky about sex with the president.
Well, they'd been digging forever, trying to get these women, because obviously at this point it was well known, his philandering, and they were trying to get anything they could do to tarnish Bill.
So somebody in this circle tells the Paula Jones people, hey, this is happening. Linda Tripp talks to him, plays some of these tapes for them.
Well, there was the reporter was key too.
Michael Isikoff.
Isikoff was another conduit there.
So
because he was reporting originally on the Whitewater, he was a reporter for the Times, I believe, wasn't he?
He was with the Post. I
Post
think.
is who it was.
So, yeah, Isikoff at one point doesn't want to listen to them, but so the Paula Jones people know about Lewinsky. And they have this deposition, and the deposition takes place. And so to finish off with the elves, I think it is interesting that you think of the hatred that the current press corps and the Democrats have for Kellyanne Conway, Brett Kavanaugh, and Ann Coulter.
There's a lot of history there.
It is possible that Brett Kavanaugh is the person that called the Starr investigation and said, there's a woman named Monica Lewinsky, you need to talk to Linda Tripp. Here's the information.
Well, they were. It's not disputed that they were feeding the lawyers in the civil suit.
So these elves actually helped write these part of the Paula Jones stuff. So they knew about it. And so when Clinton sits down to testify with the Paula Jones people, he doesn't know that they know about Monica Lewinsky.
Yeah.
So he's just smooth sailing, knows everything, how to do everything, and then
They even admit that he passed, and it was
he was
he killed it.
He was killing him.
He killed him,
and then they totally derailed him with the Lewinsky stuff. So then all hell breaks loose. So after the allegations, so let's see here. So eventually, the special prosecutor goes to the Rosenstein, the assistant attorney general of the time, Eric Holder. Eric Holder works for Janet Reno, and they want to expand from the Whitewater investigation to the Lewinsky and other things because they know that he's lying.
Yeah.
And so they have expanded into him lying and perjuring himself, and then that's when they start investigating the Lewinsky section.
No, don't drink.
Sorry.
You've almost killed 2 bottles? Or just one? Just one? You knew this was going to be a long podcast. You brought both of those bad boys.
I did, yeah.
I'm going to buy you for Christmas one of the, like a champagne holder we can put ice in, but it'll fit those, so you can keep your water bottles nice and cold. So where were we at? We were at
so
he had
just
given his the recorded statement.
Yeah. So Starr then goes and enlists Linda Tripp, a staffer for the Defense Department. She had recorded with Monica Lewinsky. She, she actively starts working with Starr. So here's this woman who has befriended Monica Lewinsky. Here's this 24-year-old girl who thinks that this older woman, is on her side. She's revealing all these deeply personal things.
Yeah, she was her confidant, I guess you could say.
Yeah, she was the only one that she had told, but she was kind of politically savvy, so she thought she could trust her. And that's...
I can't believe she recorded every conversation for
she used
years.
She used her to get famous.
It's crazy.
So, unbeknownst to the public, Starr's investigation had uncovered something damning from a previous investigation. The burglarized documents from Foster's suicide were found in Hillary Clinton's office with her fingerprints on them. Though not admissible as part of the sexual misconduct investigation and prevented from use in court under the executive privilege, the documents would later be used to unsuccessfully turn the public opinion against Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. Eventually, Kathleen Willey came forward to Starr, who had granted her immunity from any charges. She claimed to him that... Now, the notes say she'd been raped, but I think Willey was the one who said she'd been groped, right? So she was the one that wanted the job that went into the White House?
I believe Willey, she was the woman that owned the one who was raped, if that's correct. She owned an old folks home in Arkansas, and he was Attorney General at the time.
That's Juanita Broderick.
Is that Broderick?
Broderick's the one that was raped. Willey went in.
So yeah, that's wrong then.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Unfortunately for Starr, 6 of her friends in the recording on the tape for Tripp demonstrated that the sex she had had with the president was consensual. So, let's see here.
So many horrors.
I know. Let me see.
Stop it. Where are we at?
I'm trying to find my place.
This is good pod.
I know. Well, I'm going to edit all this part out. So there's just so much going on in my brain. Like, I literally woke up at the middle of the night, and I was like going through all this stuff in my head. It was just crazy. So, eventually, let's just cut this short. Eventually, the Lewinsky, it just starts getting deeper and deeper. They know more and more. They find out about the gifts from Linda Tripp. They find out about a blue dress.
Well, I think once Tripp decided she was going to cooperate, the main thing was they were trying to set Bill up and Monica up they wanted to catch him in a obstruction of justice.
Right.
So she was wearing a wire for a while, and they were it was kind of funny too, because she ended up using Lewinsky ended up using Bill's lawyer, what was his name?
Vernon Jordan.
Vernon Jordan. So there was they claimed that there was some because Bill wanted to get the story straight at one point, and obviously he was the conduit there.
Yeah.
Vernon Jordan was. But that never, I don't think that ever came about anything as far as obstruction goes.
So they know that Clinton is lying about Lewinsky on this first deposition. So they then start pressing Monica Lewinsky. They start going to her. They have tapes. They have her on tape. At one point, she goes to dinner with Linda Tripp and says, I'm gonna lie. Linda Tripp says, I'm gonna tell the truth. And so 12 hours before they're to depose Bill Clinton, 24 hours, eventually dwindles to 12, they actually go and want to talk to Monica Lewinsky. So they have Linda Tripp set up a meeting with her at the Pentagon, and they ended up taking her to the Ritz-Carlton in the Connected Hotel, and the
Pentagon Mall, I believe.
The FBI and the independent investigators, to keep her in this hotel room for like 12, 18 hours. And I want you to hear a little bit. This is Monica Lewinsky talking about how she was treated by the special counsel. So you get an idea of how these people operate. So when you hear about this in the news with people like Jerome Corsi, you hear what they actually, how they treat them.
The setup was basically she was lying about nothing, but they made it seem like it was going to be the biggest deal of all time.
Yeah.
And then there was another part, I'm sure you'll hear in here, where they made her feel that she couldn't leave, but technically she was staying. She could have left. She came back at one point.
Yeah,
but I'm sure that'll
you'll hear it all.
It's crazy, the mind tricks there.
Yeah,
obviously she had no idea what the hell was going on.
Again, this is a little longer, but it's
crazy.
It's gripping, and it's much better than me trying to explain it to you. So
way better than me explaining.
Yeah, Bruce Udall is the guy that eventually has a conscience and quits. He's the kind of gravelly voiced person that you hear in this.
Someone told me to sit down somewhere. I sat in one of the club chairs or on the corner of a bed. One of the FBI agents, his jacket was kind of folded back, and I saw that he had a gun. And he said, does that make you uncomfortable? I had no sense of what could happen and what would happen. The connecting room door opens, and in walks this very attractive-looking man in a suit who introduces himself as Mike Emick, one of the lawyers from the Office of the Independent Counsel working with Ken Starr. So now
Remember the guy that got chastised by the judge earlier in the report? That's the guy that I told you to remember. This is Mike Emick.
My brain is really exploding of how they mentioned Paula Jones, now Ken Starr. Ken Starr is Whitewater. Really, what the is happening here?
Two agents came in with Monica and with Linda Tripp, which was a surprise to me and to Michael. She was somewhat disheveled. She was wearing workout clothes. Her face was blotched as if she'd been crying.
The only thing I really thought to do was what I had seen happen in TV and in the movies, which was to ask for my lawyer. They said that they wanted to question me, and that after they talked to me about what it was that they wanted to discuss, that if I wanted to call my lawyer, then that I could decide to do so. But that if my lawyer was present now, they wouldn't be able to give me as much information as they could without my lawyer.
She was basically told that she could contact a lawyer, and then at some point she indicated that she was represented by this attorney, Frank Carter. She had gotten to that lawyer through Vernon Jordan. We really didn't know if he was involved in bad conduct with Vernon Jordan to begin with, and that's why he was brought on to represent Monica. We just didn't know. And what the hell do you do in a situation like this? Because you don't want to tell somebody, no, you can't contact this lawyer. We were doing this all on the fly. We had 24 hours or less than that to get ready. Mike was really struggling with this.
Mike starts to lay out for me this litany of legal jargon. They knew I had signed a false affidavit. They had me on tape saying I would lie under oath.
Look, I will deny it, so he will not get screwed in the case, but I'm going to get screwed personally. The bottom line is, you're going to lie, I'm going to tell the truth, and we have a huge problem. So
they said that I had committed crimes. They said they were going to prosecute me for obstruction of justice, signing a false affidavit, witness tampering, and conspiracy. I didn't even know what witness tampering was. They were clearly trying to pressure me into understanding the gravity of the situation in which I found myself.
She could have been targeted with trying to suborn perjury by encouraging.
Pay attention to this part.
Yeah, this is
Tripp
neat.
to commit perjury. And she could have been prosecuted for filing a false affidavit to convince her to cooperate. But Mike and I never really thought seriously that there was a criminal case to be made against Monica Lewinsky. I think you might be able to count on one hand the number of prosecutions there have been for filing a false affidavit in connection with a civil case.
This is what you don't talk to the cops. Here's a scared 24-year-old girl, and this guy's like, he knows they're not going to charge her with anything, but they're scaring the hell out of her.
Yeah, we got you have something that we want, and we're gonna get it, or we're gonna ruin your life.
A private sexual relationship. People view that type of lie differently from lies for venal purposes. So I think that's why you see Mike, he made the offer of granting her immunity, within a very short period of time when she was in that hotel room. I hadn't anticipated being that quickly.
In order to cooperate and to avoid charges, I would have to make phone calls, monitored phone calls, which they would listen into and record, and I might have to wear a wire and go see people actually in person. The ground completely crumbled in that moment. I felt so much guilt, and I was terrified.
Mike made his best pitch, and Mike had been doing most of the prep work to figure out what he was going to say to her, because it's impossible to rehearse for something like that. You go with your instincts, and he was basically trying to be as calm and reassuring as possible, but she was alternating between being hysterical, being angry, being abusive.
They imagined that I would have flipped really easily. They had no plan in place for what would happen if I said no. There was a point for me somewhere in this sort of first several hours where I would be hysterically crying and then I would just shut down. And in the shutdown period, I remember looking out the window and thinking that the only way to fix this was to kill myself, was to jump out the window. And I felt terrible. I was scared, and I was mortified and afraid of what this was gonna do to my family. And you know, I still was in love with Bill at the time. So I felt really responsible.
When it was clear that we had sort of reached an impasse and we weren't making any progress, and Mike's nice guy approach wasn't working, they brought in Jackie, who would probably tell you he was right out of central casting for the bad cop. He was a big, burly guy, very intimidating, booming voice. As differential as Mike was to Monica, Jackie was, a little rough around the edges with her, to be sure.
I kept asking, could I call my mom? They kept saying no. He said, you're 24. You don't need to call your mommy. You need to make a decision about what to do. And so I said, well, then you should know I'm leaning towards not cooperating. And he said, well, you should know that we're also planning on prosecuting your mom for the things that you said she did on the tape.
Basically told her, listen, you don't need to call your mommy. You're a big girl, and you have to make some decisions on your own while you still can.
And I basically stood my ground and said that if they would not let me call my mom, I couldn't make this decision without talking to her. So eventually, they said, okay.
I mean, so you can't talk to your lawyer. We don't want you to talk to your lawyer. We know we're not going to charge you, but we're going to scare you with all these crimes, and I'm going to come in and be mean to you and make fun of you.
The reason behind that is interesting because they knew that the lawyer would tip off Bill.
Right.
That's what they didn't.
Well, they didn't want her to call the Vernon Jordan.
Yeah.
She had a lawyer because of Vernon Jordan, because of the affidavit that she signed. Yep. And they didn't know if he was in on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't want to tip off Clinton that they knew about Lewinsky because he was going to testify the next day.
Yeah. So that's pretty crazy. And then bringing her mom into it which gets interesting because her mom has to give a deposition. I believe she gets deposed
later on. And when the voice that you hear, Bruce Udall, he's watching her testify.
Yeah.
And she's like, I see his face change, and it's like something breaks at him. And then he quit the next day.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of the end of this when Lewinsky's mom comes in, and then listen to how it ends, because this is what I want you to understand. Never talk to the authorities without a lawyer, and if they tell you you can't, they're lying.
I called my mom from a payphone. I was hysterical. She couldn't understand me, and she eventually came to understand. FBI, have me. I'm in a hotel. And so my mom said to breathe and to go back to the hotel room and to ask whoever was in charge to call her.
When Monica left, we just figured, well, she'll never come back. But lo and behold, she did. I talked to her mother on the phone. explaining the situation to her. And apparently her mother didn't like to fly between New York and Washington, so she arranged to get on a train and come down.
My mom called my dad on the train.
Marcia called me and she said, Monica was in trouble. Did I know anything about her and the president? And I said, what? No, I don't know anything. What are you talking about? And she said, do you know a lawyer in Washington, D.C.? She needs a lawyer. It was earth-shattering. January 16th is the most harrowing day of all of our lives. I have never forgotten every second of it.
I still remember the moment between hearing the knock on the door and the door opening and it being my mom. And that was a moment where I sort of finally felt I was tethered back to reality a bit.
I walked in and she was standing in the middle of the room and she was shaking and trembling. I put my arms around her and said, everything will be all right. But I didn't really think everything would be all right. I was trying to act brave. I thought it was important for them not to see how frightened I was. They were saying she had to cooperate and betray other people.
I said I wanted to talk to my mom alone. They said they'd leave the room. I said no because I was certain it was bugged. So she and I traversed the hallway, back and forth.
I said, you must cooperate, Monica. I wanted her to do what they said because they were threatening more than 20 years in jail. And this would be just to protect Bill Clinton. That's who they were really after. She was just a means.
She understood my loyalty to Bill Clinton, but she had no loyalty to Bill Clinton. Her loyalty was to her daughter.
Like any mother, my priority is my daughter's safety and her future. And so, yes, I wanted her to cooperate.
At that time, I was in the second room, and I walked out not knowing they were in the hallway. And I overheard Monica Lewinsky's mother say, Monica, you're going to tell these people the truth. You're going to tell them everything they need to know, and we're going to end this thing right now. And Monica said back to her mother, Mom, don't be so naive. I'm not going to be the one to bring down the president of the United States.
And they took me separately into another room, and they said, if she will cooperate, we will make an immunity offer. And I said, could you put that immunity offer in writing, please?
Listen to this.
And the whole room changed. They were exchanging glances, and the man in charge said, I can't do that. I don't have a typewriter here. That was when I knew that this was terrible trouble, that we couldn't trust. We couldn't trust them.
She informed them that she had called my dad. So they were now kind of apoplectic. Already they hadn't wanted me to tell my mom. Now my mom has told my dad.
We don't want anybody to know what's going on here, and we want to scare the hell out of you, so you do what we want you to do.
Whenever we talked with Monica, which was only a very short amount of time, they wouldn't let her talk much. You could tell she was terrified. I mean, you know your child, you know.
By that time, Monica's father had gotten with his friend and malpractice attorney, Bill Ginsburg. They got on the phone with Mike, and Bill Ginsburg basically told Mike if they wanted to talk to her and wanted to do anything, that she had to get immunity. Ginsburg said there was no way she was going to wear a wire on anybody. It was clear that at that point that the matter was not going to be resolved. And so basically, he told Mike to put Monica back on the phone, and she was told to get out of there. And that he'd fly out there the next day and take over. And so they were escorted outside by the agents.
So I'm not naive enough to think that this is just the Starr investigation that treats these two witnesses in kind of this aggressive, we're going to scare you. This is how they all treat all of this is how prosecutors treat victims.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's relevant for you to understand that when you hear the news about this current situation, or if you're ever, God forbid, in your own situation like this, they're trying to scare you. Just ask for your lawyer. Keep your mouth shut. Don't talk to anybody.
And record it.
And record it all.
Yeah. I mean, that episode there was eye-opening for the way that they actually operated.
Yeah.
And this is about a blowjob.
Right.
I mean,
right.
This isn't even a serious... They made that out to be Yeah, obviously you could tell in her voice everything. 20 years and lying on an civil affidavit. You know,
she's thinking about jumping out a window. She's so scared.
Yeah.
And the emotions are just right there sitting
it's
there.
crazy.
Yeah,
I couldn't imagine if it was something more serious.
Yeah. All right, so what I want to do is establish somewhat of a timeline because it's very easy to get lost kind of in this jungle here. So we've talked about the Whitewater end of this, and so in '96, let's go back. Robert Fisk gets appointed in January of '94. In August of '94, that's when Kenneth Starr gets replaced. So, and then in '95, that's when Lewinsky starts working at the White House. She leaves for the Pentagon in April of '96, and in May of '96, that's when the first Whitewater trial ends with the conviction of the McDougalls for fraud, and a Senate hearing ends inconclusively. So a weird episode happens in February of '97. Kenneth Starr wants to step down, so they're just kind of keeping the office open, but there's not a whole lot going on. They're kind of looking at a couple things. Kenneth Starr tries to step down.
He was going to go be the dean of Pepperdine?
He was going to go run the law school of Pepperdine, and then he went on to run Baylor. And Pepperdine was and Pepperdine was funded by this conservative billionaire who was also running the Arkansas Project, who was trying to bring up all of these
dig up the dirt.
So he thought that wouldn't look good. So he goes back and he continues to run. So. According to the Star Report in September '98, when it was released, in May '97, Clinton tells Lewinsky the affair is over. And just days later, the claim that the president shouldn't have immunity from civil cases gets rejected by the Supreme Court. So he actually has to go testify in the Paula Jones affair. So in August of '97, here's a weird thing. This shows you the Linda Tripp motives. Linda Tripp is reported in Newsweek magazine as having seen White House staffer Kathleen Willey emerge from the Oval Office looking disheveled but happy with her lipstick smeared. Mr. Clinton's attorney Robert Bennett claims that Ms. Tripp is not to be believed. So somehow she finds herself in the middle of the Willey stuff too, even though
I think that was the whole goal. Because she was in contact with Goldberg for off and on. They were phone buddies. She was always giving her dirt.
So in September of '97. Tripp begins to tape her telephone calls with Lewinsky. In December of '97, Ms. Lewinsky is subpoenaed by lawyers for Paula Jones. So again, the lawyers for Paula Jones find out through Lucinda Goldberg and the Elves that Ms. Lewinsky exists and these tapes exist. And then in '97, she goes to work for December 26th. Ms. Lewinsky leaves the Pentagon, so she's without a job. They have their last phone conversation January 5th of 1998, Clinton and Lewinsky. So on January 7th, 1998, Lewinsky denies having an affair with Mr. Clinton in a sworn affidavit in an attempt to avoid testifying in the sexual harassment case brought on by Paula Jones. So Vernon Jordan says, hey, fill out this affidavit, say you didn't do anything wrong, and send it off. So that's
that way she wouldn't have to testify or be called before the court.
Yes. So on January 7th, she signs this affidavit. On the 12th, Linda Tripp contacts the independent counsel Kenneth Starr's office, offering him 20 hours of taped conversations between her and Lewinsky. The next day, Ms. Tripp is fitted with a hidden microphone by FBI agents for further conversations with Lewinsky. Then a few days later, on January 16th, Janet Reno, the U.S. Attorney General, approves the Whitewater Independent Counsel Kenneth Starr's request for an expansion to include the Clinton-Lewinsky affair.
One note on that was interesting, I found the meeting where Tripp's wearing a wire where they go to lunch. At one point, I think she did something to the microphone, so she got up to go to the bathroom, and they interview Lewinsky, and she goes, I completely thought she was recording me, because she had a hunch at this point.
Right.
And so she went through her purse to see if she had a recorder, but little did she know she was wearing a fucking actual wire, which I was like, holy shit.
It is funny to see, like, Lewinsky is such a kid, and
she was the most gullible.
She was just a sweet girl, like she's so sympathetic. You realize like this girl just got like
she had no. It was weird
at the time.
Honestly.
Being younger, I was like, yeah, the president. You know, my parents were Republicans, so I was like, yeah,
well,
the
remember
president,
they
blah blah blah. But now, like having been,
they painted her out to be a home wrecker, and that she had all this. That the only reason she wanted to be an intern was to blow the president, pretty
but, like,
much.
You know, think about like when you were 24. Or if you are an older person, like I'm 35, and so I have a lot of younger friends, and like a woman, for her to have a crush on the president, and like it seems so natural, and he took advantage of her, and I just feel bad. Like she made her decisions, like she's an adult, but he also took advantage. It's like one of those weird things where it's like it's not right or wrong, but it's just not good, you know.
She had no idea the gravity of the situation.
No clue.
Either.
No
I mean,
clue.
she just thought it was a little fling with some guy,
then
who actually liked her.
Yeah, and then
which is weird.
She's not sophisticated enough to realize that like she's one of 15 on his Rolodex. You know, it's. And then what happens to her after it becomes public, and the joke that she gets turned into even to this day, and it's like not called the Clinton impeachment, it's not called the Whitewater impeachment, it's called the Lewinsky affair, and it's like she's like, why isn't it called the Clinton affair? And that's why the name of the documentary is what it is. You know, and I have a lot of sympathy for her because she was slut shamed by, you know.
Well, that's a whole nother issue, especially in today's world. Which the last episode of the Clinton affair gets into.
Yeah.
About the whole Me Too movement.
Well, yeah, all these major organizations like the Times are supporting it, you know, in even running a piece by Gloria Steinem, the feminist icon, and reviewed the evidence and published an op-ed, and she claimed, quote, Mr. Clinton seems to have made a clumsy sexual pass and accepted rejection.
It was all based on politics.
Right.
It had no, you know, it had no basis in that he was a philanderer, you know, that he could have been, you know, manipulating these women.
Yeah,
they were victims. There was no way that these women were victims in their eyes.
Yeah, I mean, it is really unfortunate what happened to her. So let's jump back into the timeline here. So January 17th, Clinton testifies under oath to lawyers in the Jones harassment case, denying an affair with Lewinsky. He does acknowledge sleeping with Jennifer Flowers. In January 19th, 2 days later in 98, Lewinsky's name and rumors are published by the Drudge Report. Newsweek didn't publish it.
They had it on the...
Michael Isikoff had it ready to go. He was working not for the Post, but for the Newsweek.
Yep,
and he had it all ready, and they decided they got too scared. They didn't publish it. And so Lucinda Goldberg sends it over to Drudge, and that's what launches Drudge into fame. The Post reports Lewinsky's allegations a couple days later after they've followed up. Clinton denies the charges. There is no improper relation. He tells it comes out, and then he has 3 interviews that day, and he doesn't cancel them. He goes about and does them. January 26th, that's when he says, "I did not have sex with that woman, not a single time." On January 29th, after this, 67% of Americans approve of him. March 13th, Paula Jones' lawyers in the sexual harassment suit against Clinton published much of their evidence. So that's when a lot of the Jones stuff comes out. Kathleen Willey comes forward as in March 15th as in the Jones case that Clinton fondled her in the Oval Office. April 1st, the Paula Jones harassment case against the president is dismissed before it goes to a trial. She later sues him and wins $850,000. On June 2nd, the possibility of an immunity deal being struck between Lewinsky and Starr is raised.
That was
by William
That's
Ginsburg.
a fascinating point, too.
Yeah.
When they rescinded that.
Yeah. So, you know, while we're in this period of the timeline, let's jump back a little bit. So when Clinton actually testifies, let's go to... So let's jump back just a little bit because I don't want to miss this. I want to talk about how Monica Lewinsky was treated by the special prosecutor. Okay, so let's jump back into this timeline that we're following here, thanks to The Guardian and Mittens. So on June 30th, Ms. Tripp begins giving evidence to the Washington grand jury, President Clinton's alleged cover-up of the affair. On July 28th, Lewinsky announces an immunity deal. So she's going to give full and truthful testimony. She's questioned for 15 days by the grand jury. July 29th, Clinton decides to testify about all of it. On August 3rd, he's asked for a blood sample for DNA testing. Now, why is that? Is because there was one time where they were intimate in the kitchen of the off the Oval Office, and after they were finished, she stood up to give him a hug, and some DNA, let's say, was smeared on the dress. Betty, the secretary, didn't see it. The friends at dinner didn't see it, and if they did, they didn't say anything, but there's the famous blue dress. She tells Tripp about it, and it's on tape, and so then they start going, all right, what gifts? What about this blue dress? So Clinton testifies on August 17th, acknowledging inappropriate intimate contact. This is when you get the famous "what is." It
depends on what the definition of is.
Because Clinton, and you see this wry little smile if you watch it. You see him go, nailed it. Because it was a perjury trap. They're basically saying, didn't you lie under oath about this
time.
At the time?
Yep.
And I forget the specific question, but
The specific question, I believe, was, did you have, or it was...
your lawyer...
was implying that it was happening currently.
Currently, yes.
Instead of in the past.
So this is the greatest. This is the greatest reason why Trump should not testify, because the greatest lawyer of a generation, sitting in that moment, is asked the question With counsel, he's asked a question, but he doesn't even need his counsel.
No.
He's asked, when your lawyer said this and this statement, weren't you being untruthful? And he says, well, it means what is the definition of is, and basically saying like, I'm not having sex with Monica Lewinsky right now. So, so he gets out of it.
Basically a gotcha.
Because if he answers yes, then he perjures himself. If he answers no, he perjures himself at that moment. So he's kind of it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't question it. He got out of it, and you see this little smile come across his face. And even I was kind of like, because I have a real tough time with this thing because I don't like Bill Clinton, but I also really hate the pigs. So you want to see somebody thwart the pigs?
Yeah. It's a railroad job, you know, and it's...
Yeah. So he, on September 8th, let's skip that part. On September 9th, 1998, Kenneth Starr releases his report to Congress. It has 11 possible grounds. The House votes to make the 445-page report public. So he...
Immediately before they read it.
Yeah, they didn't even read it. They made it public on September 11th. Republicans vote on September 18th to release the videotape, and it's broadcast on September 21st. So when they play the tape, they see the video of Clinton. I actually have a VHS of the testimony still.
Really?
Bought it a long time ago. But what happened publicly, this is right before an election, and what happens... when they play the tape,
it completely backfires.
It completely backfires on the Republicans. They look like dicks. They look petty. It looks like Clinton is getting screwed in this moment.
He becomes a victim as soon as that videotape is released.
So and immediately all of it starts to skyrocket. Now in this time period, Larry Flynt is actually... yeah, I know.
God, I love Larry Flynt.
So in this time period, Larry Flynt is offering $1 million for dirt on Republicans, and he got more than a couple hits. So Bob Barr, who was the manager, Bob Barr ran as the LP candidate in 2008. Part of the reason he did that is because he was disgraced during all this. He was a House manager, meaning he was helping prepare the case, preparing the impeachment process. He ends up, they find out he has an affair, so he had to resign. Newt Gingrich, Speaker of the House, has to resign because he's exposed to having an affair. After his replacement...
that's the best one.
Bob Livingston. Bob Livingston, they find out he's going to be Speaker of the House, and they find out he's having an affair. And then on the first day of impeachment, he gives this speech on the House floor where he basically says... I had sex with this woman, and you should resign like I'm resigning at this moment, which is like crazy.
If you watch the video of that, it's insane because the Democrats are all hooting and hollering, and then he's like, "Let me finish," and then he literally steps down seconds later.
Dan Burton, congressman from here in Indiana, he didn't step down, but he got caught up in this. And found out he had an affair. I think he had a kid with somebody. Helen Chenoweth and Henry Hyde, the head of the Judicial Committee. Remember, it starts in the Judicial Committee.
Mm-hmm.
He's found out. So the guy who's the Speaker of the House, the guy who's managing the impeachment, and the guy who oversaw the impeachment, Henry Hyde, all got caught having infidelities. So then, let's see here. The impeachment trial was delayed at one point because Clinton made a surprise attack on Iraq right before the trial was set to commence. After the trial was rescheduled, it was decided that the testimony from Lewinsky was unnecessary given the volume of prepared statements and recorded messages. What actually happened is Trent Lott said, there's no reason to drag this 24-year-old girl in before the Senate and make her testify about all the blowjobs.
I found that very interesting, too. Once it passed the House and got to the Senate, I found the way they handled that to be fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, the Clinton Affair documentary really kind of gets into, with all the players, a lot of the nuts and bolts of how the Clinton folks did it. So
he didn't want to make a spectacle out of it.
Yeah. So let's jump back into the timeline. On October 2nd, everything's released, and including the tapes. On October 5th, a few days later, the House Judiciary Committee, headed by Hyde, the cheater, votes to launch a congressional impeachment inquiry against him. October 8th, the House of Representatives vote for impeachment proceedings to begin against Clinton. The Judiciary Committee will be given wide powers to draw up detailed charges against Clinton based on the 11 allegations. The 2 core charges are announced on October 14th, a few days later, that Clinton lied under oath and attempted to obstruct justice. Lawyers for Paula Jones make their final demand on the 17th. They want $1 million. On the 13th, she drops her sexual harassment appeal against Clinton after Clinton settles for $850,000. No acknowledgement of guilt or no apology in that settlement, which is really what she wanted. On November 19th, Starr testifies in front of the Judiciary Committee, which I thought was another interesting part of all that. You see some parallels in the way that a lot of the House people are talking to Kenneth Starr and how a lot of them. Let's see here. December 1st, the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee widens the scope of its inquiry into an election thing that just isn't really relevant to a lot of what we're talking about. On December 11th, 1998, the Judiciary Committee approves 3 articles of impeachment on a 21-16 party line vote, passing them to the House. So then the House goes on. Clinton declares himself profoundly sorry and willing to accept censure. Censure is basically just a vote in the House saying that this person did wrong. There's no consequences to it. A lot of Republicans kind of wanted censure, but they also knew that, hey, it's not good for my political career if I do that. The committee approves a 4th article of impeachment on a party line vote, accusing Clinton of abusing power. Part of it was he asked his secretary, Betty Curry, who was manning the door, who was kind of the liaison. If Lewinsky needed to talk to him, she could talk to Betty, and he asked Betty to lie. And so that was a big part of this. A last-minute stay of execution on December 17th, that's when the missiles were launched. So then on December 19th, Clinton is impeached as the Republican-controlled House approves 2 of the 4 proposed articles of impeachment by narrow partisan majorities, 228 to 206 and 221 to 212. So then he's sent to a trial in the Senate. He says he won't step down. Newly appointed House of Representatives Bob Livingston announces he will step down because he found out that he was having the affair. Yes. On December 20th, Clinton's advisors begin a secret consultation with Senate Republicans on possible compromise deals. Because here's the thing. no matter what was going to happen in the House, it's a 50+1 majority. They knew he wasn't going to get convicted in the Senate. It just wasn't going to happen. And a lot of, like, Trent Lott calls up Tom Daschle, who was, Trent Lott's the head of the Senate, calls up the Democratic head of the Senate, and he's like, well, I guess this is our fucking problem now.
He's like, how the hell do we do this?
They had no idea how to do it. So they looked back at some of the Johnson stuff, but it was also a different time, so they bring in Rehnquist and have him preside over it, and they have, the Hyde and the members of the House come and present their evidence of why they impeached him, and then the president's people give a response back, and then they take a vote. But they didn't really have any clue how to run this because it's been 150 years this year, so it was 130 some years since Johnson had been at that point. So let's see. So so what ends up happening, Clinton was not removed from office, with every single Democrat voting that on count 1 he did not lie under oath, or on count 2 obstruct justice. The vote went along party lines. On the second charge, 5 Republicans voted with the Democrats. The Senate got 50 votes to remove him from office, nowhere close to the 67% needed. So that is in January, January 7th, and that's then I think it's February before it's all over. So his popularity remained at 70%, even after admitting the lies and having his settlements exposed, predatory sex habits revealed, and shockingly, even with the rediscovery of the stolen Whitewater papers from Vince Foster's office, Starr was criticized by Democrats for spending $70 million on an investigation that substantiated only perjury and obstruction of justice. Even after the trial, Joy Behar referred to the victims as tramps on The View, to the tune of applause. According to The Cut, Clinton stands by his response to the scandal. I did the right thing, Clinton said, adding that he does not owe Lewinsky a personal apology because he publicly apologized on more than one occasion. Even after the Me Too movement, the Pew Research found that 33% of Americans still believe Clinton to be the best president of their lifetime. So, yeah, it is quite the situation.
All for nothing.
All for nothing. But I hope we did a good job of kind of outlining the parallels there, because I think there is a lot in all this to learn, and the Republicans paid a huge price for this. Even into the early days of George Bush, really until 9/11.
Yeah.
Then you had the 2000 election. Clinton couldn't campaign with Gore a lot because Clinton was still kind of damaged from it a little bit, but you really see the Republicans to this day all say this was a huge mistake.
Oh, it was. They completely overplayed their hand.
Yeah.
They thought for sure that they were going to find something completely damning that the Senate would vote impeach as well.
Right.
But, I mean, once you go down that road, there's really no going back.
Yeah.
Which we'll see how the House handles it upcoming.
I mean, Maxine Waters is no Henry Hyde.
No, I know.
So Maxine Waters is going to be the head of the Judicial Committee now that Conyers had to step down. So she's going to be in charge of the impeachment proceedings. So that ought to be hilarious.
I can't wait. I think it's going to be.
I think they're going to try it, but we'll see. So we're going to talk a little more in depth on Tuesday about what's actually happening with Mueller, however you say it, and all the new developments that are happening. But we wanted to give you just a background of the 2 impeachment trials that mattered because it actually happened, and then we'll talk about Watergate at some other time because that's very, very complex.
The parallels between the special counsels are what really need to be expanded on, really. And the similarities, I think you can see it, history repeating itself, honestly. And then the players involved is just still to this day is amazing. I mean, it's the same people. And I mean, one could even say it could be payback for the Clinton investigation. I mean, if you wanted to look at it that way.
If you want to look at it conspiratorially, then you have the Clinton folks pushing this to get Trump impeached to really hurt the Republican Party. Brett Kavanaugh.
Then the Kavanaugh. I mean, once you bring Kavanaugh into it, it even makes it. It almost has to be.
Yeah.
You can't ignore it, honestly.
So it's insane. All right. So final thoughts, Tad.
Final thoughts. I think honestly, if you look at it honestly, and politics aside, the Clinton impeachment, I think it was a complete railroad job. And once you open up the can of worms that the special investigator is, and going down any road, you're going to find minor crimes, whether or not they're impeachable, probably not.
Right.
And you're going to have a lot of process crimes, like I think what you're seeing currently with the Russia investigation.
Yeah.
And whether or not anything comes out of that, we'll see. But I don't know. I think if you look at it honestly and from a non-political standpoint, it's a complete. It's a complete disgrace. It's not law and order. It's not the way anything should be done. Honestly, if you look at it, and I don't think the ends justified the means, in the Clinton investigation.
I as much as I hate to defend a Clinton, I honestly agree with you. I feel like it was completely unnecessary. It was the Republicans overplaying their hand, pushing too hard. And I mean,
it was completely political.
It was totally political, and if you go back to the beginning of this episode, 800 years ago, and you think about what impeachment was intended to mean, it was somebody who was using their public position to really have. I mean, ADFA, yeah, that probably makes sense. The Clinton Foundation, yeah, that probably makes sense. But Whitewater, no, there was nothing about his time as president that had anything to do with Whitewater, so it should have never had begun. Perjury, lying about a sexual issue like that, was a very small crime. It was in a civil case. It had nothing to do with his ability to operate as president, because people already think presidents are liars.
And what's fascinating as well is that Kavanaugh was at the opinion that a president shouldn't have to, give a statement under oath,
right,
in a civil case, as president, which is kind of mind-boggling now.
Isn't it odd that it didn't come up as much as you'd think that he was involved in the Starr investigation?
I think that was another. They figured they could get him on the, obviously the
Blasey Ford stuff.
The Blasey Ford stuff, but. You think if it was honestly, you would look into that. That would be one of the main things that you would look into if you're vetting a judge. But my God, I don't know. Maybe it was a little bit of bait and switch theater. I don't know.
All right. Well, thank you to Christy Avery, Jason Doolittle, Craig DeCosta, and the Libertarian Coalition for being our $100 subscribers or Patreon members. Thanks to all of our Patreon members. You guys are all awesome. You keep this whole thing going, all the software and everything that we use to prep
all
for
the
these
toner.
functions.
My God, we went through 40 pounds of toner.
It is true
for the prep.
I spend probably $70 every few months on toner here, every couple months, because I do a lot of printing. So, all right, thanks for joining us here on this episode of We're Libertarians. We hope you enjoyed it and hope you got a lot out of it. And if you did, please share it. Please tell your friends, and please donate on Patreon. We appreciate it very much. Tad, thank you for joining me here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. Make sure you listen to Tad Talk whenever he releases a perennial episode. Hopefully we can convince him to come back.
How long has it been?
Months. 3 weeks? 4 weeks?
Huh? Since I've recorded one?
Yeah. I think you did one in the last month.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I don't remember.
But it's been one out of like the last 3.
I know. Well, I'm not a man who lives by a clock. I don't.
Seasonal depression is what I blame it on. All right. Thanks for joining us here in this episode.
Thanks, Doctor.
And we'll see you tomorrow.